The story kicks off just like you'd expect. Mahmut Tigrul, a confused kid who just aced the toughest military exam in Turkey, is hanging out in some ruins, deep in thought about his next move, with his loyal golden eagle, Iskender, by his side. After pulling himself together, he heads back to the nation's palace to officially get the title of Pasha after grinding for years to reach that rank. That night, there's a festival going on. While other teens are dancing and chasing after pretty girls, Mahmut's off to the side, hitting the books. His old buddy Ibrahim, who's from a different town, shows up and starts giving him a hard time for studying at a party, but he also makes sure to give Mahmut props for finally becoming a Pasha after all those sleepless nights. Mahmut, knowing how Ibrahim is, doesn't take it personally and asks how his family's doing. Ibrahim says they're all good. As they're chatting about random stuff, Shara, the best dancer in all of Alton, pops up to say hi. Ibrahim recognizes her instantly and introduces her to Mahmut. Shara's a bold girl, so she already knows what kind of guy Mahmut is. She'd never forget those serious, brooding eyes. She kneels down and congratulates him on being the youngest Pasha their land has ever seen. Then, she grabs his hand and drags him to the dance floor to loosen up and move to the music. Everyone notices him as his friends push him to dance with the crowd. Mahmut toughs it out until it's over, then chills with Ibrahim at a high-up spot, talking about the people and how much he wants to protect them. Ibrahim jokes that now that Mahmut's a big deal, he shouldn't forget about the ladies. Mahmut tries to tell him he's not into that, but then realizes his diary's missing. Pissed, he leaves Ibrahim and heads home, only to find Shara asleep on his bed. When Mahmut tries to kick her out, she grabs his diary and teases him again. Turns out, she found it in the plaza and figured it was his. Mahmut tells her to get out of his house, but he can't let her walk home alone at night since it's dangerous. So, he crashes on the roof and wakes up early the next morning to chase a thief. While the cops are clueless about where the thief went, Mahmut tracks him down and corners him at a junction. He orders the guy to drop what he stole, but the thief underestimates him. Mahmut teaches him a lesson he won't forget, using Iskender to break the guy's bones. Later in the day, Mahmut gets called up as a Pasha to join the Alton Council for an emergency meeting. Before we see the meeting, a narrator breaks down the situation between Turkey and the Balt Rhine Empire. Turns out, the empire pulled a sneak attack on Turkey, kicking off a war that only lasted a few months. Ever since, things have been shaky between the two nations. Now, the empire's prime minister has been found dead with a bunch of Turkian arrows sticking out of him. The empire's pissed and sent a message to Turkey, demanding they send someone to explain themselves within 7 days or it's war. At the meeting, Zaganos Pasha and Halil Pasha, who are both Pashas like Mahmut, start debating about striking first against the empire. Halil thinks it's reckless and dangerous, but Zaganos, who's all about war, is itching for a fight. The council listens to both sides until Zaganos and Halil agree to send someone to the empire as a scapegoat to calm things down. Before they finalize anything, Mahmut steps in and suggests a third option, but Zaganos, being a total jerk, shuts him down, calling him a kid for being so idealistic. The meeting ends, and Mahmut storms off, understandably pissed. Later, Halil finds Mahmut venting somewhere random and takes a walk with him. He listens to Mahmut's perspective and realizes Mahmut's just trying to avoid another war at all costs. Mahmut's frustrated with himself for not coming up with a solution everyone can get behind. After hearing him out, Halil tells him to quit sulking and do whatever it takes to stop the war. That gives Mahmut the light bulb moment he's been waiting for. He rushes off to find proof that Turkey didn't kill the prime minister. After 2 long days of digging, Mahmut figures it out. The feathers on Turkian arrows are usually made from eagle feathers, but the ones on the arrows found in the prime minister's body are made from a different material. This discovery makes Mahmut race to find Halil and explain everything. When he gets to the palace, though, he finds out Halil has already volunteered to be the scapegoat. Mahmut confronts Zaganos, who says Halil went willingly but left just a little while ago, so Mahmut might still catch him. Mahmut jumps on a horse and chases after Halil, finally catching up to him. Halil sees him coming from a distance and waits for him. As Mahmut approaches, he takes a moment to think back on his younger days. He remembers a time when he snuck away from his parents and found some beautiful gems along a mountain path, keeping one of them in his necklace pocket. A few thousand miles away, Empire Minister Virgilio Lewis, the guy who planned the arrow incident, hears about Turkey sending an envoy to sort things out. He figures out what's going on and goes to his king to fill him in, warning that something bad might happen again. Meanwhile, Mahmut tells Halil he doesn't need to offer himself up as the fall guy. Halil reminds him how powerless they felt when their nation was losing to the empire. Mahmut takes a second to think back to that awful time when he lost his parents. Halil apologizes for being a coward and says this is his way of making up for his mistakes. Mahmut tells him to stop apologizing and shows him the arrow so Halil can explain what he's learned about it. Halil thanks him for the help and says the arrow's details are the only thing that can stop Turkey from ending up in a pointless war. Fired up, Mahmut promises to work with Halil to stop the war. They keep traveling until they reach the ravines, where Louis's assassins ambush them. Luckily, Halil and Mahmut saw this coming. They let the assassins think they succeeded, but when the time is right, Mahmut pops out and takes them down with his smarts and his eagle. The next morning, they make it to the Empire and show the evidence to the Emperor. After hearing everything the delegates say, the Emperor shuts the case down and settles the issue. With the kingdom safe once again, Mahmut and Halil head back to Turkey and report what happened. Instead of thanking him for saving the nation, Zaganos, the jerk, tells Mahmut his luck won't last forever. Even though Mahmut wrecked his plans, Louis doesn't stop scheming. He meets with the nomads and promises to hand over the fortress city of Hisar if they team up with him. About 4 years ago, Mahmut met Ibrahim for the first time during their military exam. Back then, Mahmut was this stuck-up rich kid who couldn't get over the war that took his family. He was all about working hard, so he'd avoid talking to anyone and just focus on whatever he needed to do to pass his exams. When the results came out, Mahmut and the others got this big parade in the city so everyone could meet the new political officials. Mahmut, who's deep in thought right now, realizes that his old dream of becoming Pasha to fix world hunger after graduating was just him being naive. Being a politician is way harder than he thought. Still lost in his thoughts, Mahmut remembers how distant he was from everyone, and how he messed up a drill because he couldn't get people to follow him. That day, his handler tore into him so bad he ended up crying on his way home. Ibrahim, his best friend, was riding with him and was totally shocked to see serious Mahmut bawling like a kid. Mahmut asked Ibrahim if being a pasha was even worth it. Ibrahim, who wanted to become the Vali of his hometown, Hisar, told him if they both worked hard enough, they'd get to where they wanted. For the rest of the ride, Ibrahim kept hyping him up, telling him to stick to his goal and give it his all. Fast forward to now, Mahmut is completely floored by the news that his buddy Ibrahim, now the Vali of Hisar and probably the nicest guy Mahmut's ever known, is rebelling against their country, Turkey, and teaming up with the Araba tribe to declare independence as their own nation. It just didn't add up at all. While Mahmut was off writing poems and napping on rooftops, Ibrahim was out here attacking a merchant's mansion, kicking his men out of the oasis, and putting martial law into effect. When Zaganos, who's always itching for a fight, hears about this, he's all over it and asks for permission to rally his 4,000 troops to crush the uprising in Hisar and get things back to normal. That evening, Mahmut stops Zaganos just as he's about to leave for Hisar and begs him not to rush into it because attacking one of their own could make things worse. But Zaganos tells him the situation is way more serious than Mahmut thinks. If they let Hisar break away, the empire will swoop in, take over, and have easy access to Turkey since Hisar is the fortress city blocking the empire. Even after hearing this, Mahmut still tries to talk Zaganos out of attacking, but Zaganos says he's more interested in figuring out who's behind Ibrahim's rebellion. With that, he rides off into the sunset. Mahmut is left wondering if Zaganos already knew about the rebellion before it even started. To see what's really going on, Mahmut heads out at night with Shara to Hisar. On the way, he's hoping he can reach his buddy before things go south and his people get wiped out. Meanwhile, Louis tells the emperor about Hisar's rebellion and suggests they send troops to act like they're backing Araba. This way, they can sway public opinion and officially claim Hisar as their territory. The emperor points out that the Turkish troops aren't dumb and won't wait for the empire's army to show up before making their move. Louis reminds him about Duchess Leladeric, or Lele, and her 10-0 infantry troops. The emperor gives Louis the go-ahead to send a signal after dark. At the same time, Ibrahim meets with the leader of the Arabans in a tent where his family members are being held. He promises to stick to their deal as long as the Arabans move the families of Hisar to safety. One of the shady female warriors there shows up and calls Ibrahim out for being dumb enough to trust people so easily, letting his people's families get taken as hostages based on nothing but talk. Meanwhile, Shara and Mahmut sneak into Hisar disguised as women. They make their way to the tent and notice it's covered in oil, which confuses Mahmut. He starts worrying that his worst fears might be coming true. Right then, news hits the tent that Zaganos' forces are closing in on Hisar. Everyone freaks out because this wasn't part of the plan. One of the taller jerks in the enemy army calms everyone down and tells them to wait for the Imperial army to show up before doing anything stupid. He looks at Ibrahim and gives him instructions on how to stop Zaganos' forces from getting into the city. Ibrahim leaves the tent and heads for the walls to hold them off. On the way, he spots Mahmut and makes a comment about his outfit. Hearing his voice, Mahmut realizes he's got to act fast. When Ibrahim gets to the top of the wall, he tells his soldiers to get ready to fire as soon as the sun comes up to keep Zaganos' army from reaching the gates. Ibrahim knows they're outnumbered and outmatched, and it's only a matter of time before they're overwhelmed. On the other hand, Zaganos is thinking through the possible outcomes and realizes that showing up early has thrown a wrench in the Empire's plans to take over Hisar. Once daylight breaks, Zaganos' forces plan to attack the fortress and take Hisar back. Right before the fight kicks off, Zaganos gets word that Lele's rolling up to Hisar with a 40,000-strong army. But Lele figures out pretty quick that Zaganos and his crew beat her to the punch and got there first. She's kinda bummed about it and tells Louis. Her guy, Glalet, asks if he should just off the Emperor's envoy who came with them so they can jump straight into the fight with Zaganos. For now, they decide to chill and see how things play out. Zaganos realizes he messed up big time and wishes he'd done better. Ibrahim picks up on the shift in the vibe of the battle too. He starts overthinking everything, trying to figure out how to save his family and his people. While he's spiraling, one of his warriors shows up and reminds him how much he loves his country and Hisar. The guy tells Ibrahim that if he wants to take down Zaganos, they'll back him up and won't judge him for it. But Ibrahim's stuck because he doesn't want his men dying for no good reason. Meanwhile, a guard from Araba catches Shara and Mahmoud slipping and demands to know what they're up to. Shara plays it cool, pretending they're just dancers there to have some fun. The guard buys it and calls over some other Arabans to join the party. Shara starts chatting them up, asking how they heard about Hisar becoming a nation. One of them spills that it was a kind minister from the Empire who told them and gave them instructions on what to do about Hisar. Shara cuts through the nonsense and gets everyone hyped by dancing with them. The tall guy notices the commotion outside and sends one of his men to shut it down. Before they can, Mahmoud steps in, gets everyone's attention, and spills the tea about the Empire's shady plans to use them for political gain. The Arabans start questioning everything after hearing Mahmoud out. The tall guy leaves the tent to Eleanor, the sneaky woman from earlier, and pulls Mahmoud aside for a chat. He grills Mahmoud about his earlier actions, trying to figure out where he stands. Mahmoud, feeling pretty sure of himself, talks fancy and tells the tall guy he's there to get revenge for his friend and save him from the Empire's manipulation. The tall guy tells Mahmoud to stop letting his feelings run the show and act like a real politician, unlike Ibrahim. But Mahmoud's not about that life. He goes after the guy hard, breaking his sword to reveal what's hidden inside. After their first clash, the tall guy threatens to blow a whistle that'll signal his people to set the oil-covered tent on fire unless Mahmoud drops his weapon. Mahmoud gives in, drops his weapon, and lets the guy trash-talk him and his beliefs. After talking a bunch of random nonsense about Mahmoud and his ideals, the jerk messes him up a little more before grabbing his head and warning him not to even think about crossing the Empire again. Mahmoud keeps quiet and trusts the rest of his plan to his loyal golden eagle, Iskender. Meanwhile, in Hisar, the Arabans start questioning Eleanor and the other Empire warriors about the stuff Mahmoud accused them of. Instead of calming them down, Eleanor straight up threatens to burn down the tent and their families if they don't shut up and act right. Ibrahim notices the commotion from the wall he's standing on and wonders what's going on. For now, all he can do is wait and hope the Imperial army shows up like they promised. If not, he and his family are toast. Outside the city walls of Hisar, Zaganos' troops are stuck in a stalemate. Zaganos himself isn't sure what to do and doesn't want to mess up again. So, he decides to use a special poison on the 40-0-strong army to improve his chances of winning. Meanwhile, Layla gets bored waiting for Louis Rodorm official to give the signal to fight the Torquians. To speed things up, she has her dog, Glalet, attack the official. Back in the tent, Eleanor catches Shara trying to cut it open and free the prisoners. She stops her and questions what she's up to. Around the same time, Lele finally takes out the official and gets her troops ready for war. Mahmoud is still getting his butt kicked by the tall, annoying jerk who won't stop ranting about his selfish ideals and morals. Mahmoud doesn't agree with the guy's views and even argues with him, which doesn't end well. Luckily, Iskender comes back with a bunch of wild eagles to help with Mahmoud's plan. Shara stays quiet and waits for the plan to unfold. When the time is right, Iskender and his eagle crew lift the tent fabric, freeing Ibrahim's people and burning the Imperial soldiers holding them hostage. Ibrahim notices the shift in the battle from the wall and orders his men to let Zaganos and his troops into Hisar. Mahmoud finally gets the upper hand, and Lele, the useless duchess, retreats to the Empire since her plans are wrecked. To cover their mess, Lele and Glalet make it look like the official got crushed by a boulder. Mahmoud gets back up, grabs his sword, and fights the tall jerk for real this time. After dodging some attacks, he gets the guy in a chokehold and makes his ancestors proud by strangling the life out of him, leaving the body to rot. With that taken care of, Mahmoud heads back to Torquay to meet with the Divan and the 13 other Pashas to figure out what to do next. At the start of the meeting, Ibrahim has to defend himself against the accusations thrown at him. He says everything he did was for his family and Torquay. When asked why he left his city for Alton, he explains that he went there during the festival to attend a meeting organized by Zaganos. The king questions Zaganos, and he backs up Ibrahim's story. Then Mahmoud is told to explain why he let the people of Hisar go, even though they tried to betray Torquay. Turns out, Mahmoud convinced Zaganos to release the Arabans by reminding him of his past mistake and pointing out that the Arabans were the ones who drove the Imperial soldiers back to their land. Realizing his error, Zaganos let the Arabans go. Afterward, Mahmoud thanks Shara for her help and returned home. Mahmoud also explains that if they had harmed the Arabans, it could have sparked a rebellion against Torquay, which might have given the Empire a reason to attack them. With all the facts laid out, the council wraps up the meeting to deliberate. While waiting for their decision, decision, Mahmut remembers his last conversation with Ibrahim after saving his people and his twins from the enemy. Ibrahim was worried about his future, since it looked like he was the one who started the rebellion. Later, the council reconvenes and announces their decision. Ibrahim and Zaganos are pardoned as leaders of their communities, but Mahmut is stripped of his title as Pasha and demoted to Binbashi, serving under Halil Pasha of the 7th province. Ibrahim gets upset, not understanding why Mahmut is being punished for something he did. After the meeting, Mahmut goes to see Halil. Halil stays calm and asks Mahmut why he wants to be a Pasha. Mahmut says it's because he wants to stop another war from happening, but Halil points out that Mahmut made a mistake by abandoning his duties as Pasha to save a friend. While it was a noble thing to do, it was selfish and not in the best interest of the country. Losing his title is a chance for Mahmut to learn how to protect Turkey as a whole. Mahmut then asks if Turkey is planning to start a war, but Halil doesn't answer. That night, Zaganos finds Mahmut sulking and indirectly thanks him for saving him from his mistake. Even so, Zaganos reminds him that Mahmut's actions weren't exactly right, it just happened to work out. As a thank you, Zaganos gives Mahmut a Pyramus device, which he uses to communicate with his spies in other lands, including the Empire. Mahmut suddenly realizes everything Zaganos has been doing behind the scenes and gets really mad at him. But then he understands that he's been too focused on his own selfish goals and starts to see things from Zaganos' perspective. He accepts the gift and decides to head back to his hometown to learn how to be a better leader. Meanwhile, Louis, Lele, and Glalat are having lunch and talking about expanding their power and taking over Turkey. Louis promises not to repeat his past mistakes. Now that he knows Zaganos has spies everywhere, he plans to track down each one and kill them. Hearing this, the Duchess and Glalat toast to their future victory over Turkey. During his trip back to his hometown, Mahmut dozes off and has the worst nightmare ever. In the dream, the dark thoughts in his head tear into him, calling him a failure and reminding him there's not much he can do now that he's not the Pasha anymore. Luckily, he wakes up just in time to avoid losing his way on the road and finally makes it to his hometown, Yeni Tugrul village. When he steps out of his carriage, he takes a moment to soak in the air of his old home and feel the ground where his mom and the others were buried after the war. He looks out at the empty fields that used to be full of crops and life 12 years ago and wishes things hadn't changed, and heads into the village to get started on his mission. Once inside, Mahmut goes to the water shrine and offers the Pyramus crystal as a kind of prayer, hoping to activate it and send out a signal to anyone nearby. He manages to get the crystal to work a little, shooting a colorful beam of light into the sky, hoping one of Zaganos' spies will notice and come find him. Unfortunately, no one shows up. Later that night, Iskender picks up on a shift in the weather. He tells Mahmut, who quickly realizes it's time for the wild eagles to migrate north. That means he won't be able to use them for any of his plans until winter. He thanks Iskender for the heads up and gives his eagle a pat. Not long after, some drunk, washed up, shady old guy stumbles into the room where Mahmut is and introduces himself. Mahmut's pretty confused, but the guy who says his name is Barbaros explains that he's the flag bearer and kulak spy for Tugrul village. Mahmut notices how old the man is and asks why he's still a flag bearer. Barbaros explains his job and says he's the village's current spy. As for what a kulak is, they're special spies stationed at water shrines in different towns and villages across the continent. When someone from Zaganos shows up, the kulak identifies them and passes along all the intel they've collected. They also act as middlemen between agents to keep things running smoothly. Mahmut finally understands why he's supposed to visit water shrines every time he's in a new place. Barbaros moves on to the latest news. He tells Mahmut that Louis has been catching spies in the Empire's territory and wiping them out in just a week. He's not sure how much Louis and his crew know, but he warns Mahmut to stay sharp. Before leaving, Barbaros hands over info about someone who's looking for Mahmut, a guy named Kulak Suleiman, who wants to meet him somewhere private. After meeting with Barbaros, Mahmut heads to the spot, wondering why Suleiman wants to meet him. Eventually, Suleiman shows up and welcomes him to Zaganos' spy network. Meanwhile, Barbaros is just chilling in his usual spot, waiting for his bosses to finish their chatter. Suleiman introduces himself and his eagle, Katerina. Then, he offers Mahmut some fancy wine from Tugrul, which brings back memories of Mahmut's people before the war. Suleiman also introduces Iskender, who turns out to be a guy, and they chat about how Mahmut managed to control him. After the small talk, Suleiman gets serious. Looking sad, Suleiman shares his story. 12 years ago, when the war between Turkey and the Empire began, Suleiman was in the Republic of Florence, a place known for its diplomacy and love for art. Back then, he was living it up, drinking with aristocrats, while his village was taken over by imperial soldiers. When he heard about Tugrul's death, he asked for leave, but by the time he got home, the war was over, and his village was destroyed. Struggling with survivor's guilt, Suleiman wandered aimlessly around Turkey. One day, he ended up in Altan and saw a group of idiots and crooks joking about the war that had destroyed Tugrul. Furious, he fought them with everything he had. That's when he met Zaganos, who was just 14 at the time. Zaganos saw the pain Suleiman was in and promised to give him a purpose by making him part of his spy network once he became Pasha in 5 years. Suleiman didn't believe the kid, but sure enough, Zaganos became Pasha 5 years later. Zaganos tracked Suleiman down, finding him working in a shop. He brought him into the spy world, explaining how Florence used information to its advantage, even without much military power. To convince him further, Zaganos revealed that the master Suleiman had worked for in Florence was actually a spy for the president and had been for years. This blew Suleiman's mind, and he accepted his new role and title. After that, Suleiman traveled the world and eventually built the most intricate spy network. Mahmud is blown away by how clever and bold Zaganos is. Suleiman notices that Mahmud seems to have some beef with Zaganos and asks him about it. Mahmud explains how Zaganos humiliated him at his first divan, which makes Suleiman laugh. They share a good conversation about the crazy genius before calling it a night. Later that night, Louis sends his assassin team, led by Eleanor, to sneak into Tugril and take out Barbaros before Suleiman and Mahmud return. Barbaros is still sharp and quick, like a sly fox. When he sees the people trying to take him out, he signals Suleiman and Mahmud to come help him out of this mess with Eleanor. The two warriors hear his whistle and rush over. Just as Barbaros is about to feel the sharp end of Eleanor's weapon, Mahmud and Suleiman show up. Mahmud goes after Eleanor first and uses his funky rope gadget to call in a bunch of wild eagles. But Eleanor's too smart for that. She throws some sheep blood and meat all over Mahmud, so the eagles turn on him instead. Poor Mahmud gets attacked by his own birds. Luckily, Suleiman knows the exact sound to make to scare the eagles off. He shows up just in time, giving Mahmud a chance to clean himself up. While Mahmud's handling that, Suleiman lays into him about how dumb Eleanor is for thinking she's got the upper hand. Mahmud gets back in the fight, evening the odds, and charges at Eleanor, even though Suleiman told him not to. Turns out, that was a bad move. Eleanor breaks his rope gadget and almost takes him out. Barbaros creates a smoke screen, giving them all a chance to escape into a nearby cave. Inside the cave, Suleiman gives Mahmud a reality check, telling him he can't get anything done by acting solo. If they want to win the next fight, they need to work together and stay organized. After some time, they head back to the village and find Eleanor setting the place on fire. Suleiman teams up with his brothers to take down Eleanor and her swordsman, finally landing a solid hit. Eleanor gets beat so bad she almost falls into the fire she started. In the end, her two henchmen sacrifice themselves so she can escape being killed by Zaganos' crew. Eleanor's furious about failing but manages to slip away again. At sunrise, Suleiman says goodbye to Mahmud, hoping they'll meet again someday. But for now, he's got to report to Zaganos Pasha in Altan. Before leaving, he tells Mahmud that knowledge is power and he needs to chase it no matter what. For now, Mahmud's mission is to travel the world, learn how things work, and get better before trying to become a Pasha again. Taking his advice, Mahmud heads off to Phoenicia, the oldest port city in Rumeliana, for his next adventure. Phoenicia is this old-school ocean empire with a crazy long history, like almost 2,000 years deep. At the southern tip of the city, there's this massive lighthouse that's still got some ancient vibes going on. Mahmud, our clueless main dude, just rolled into this fancy city, not really sure what's gonna go down. He's trying to play it cool, walking in all confident but hoping to stay under the radar. When he gets to the city gates, he spots an Imperial Navy ship chilling at the harbor and figures there's probably some drama brewing. To get the scoop on what's up, Mahmud heads to the city's water shrine and uses his Pyramus crystal gadget to send out a signal for any kulak nearby to chat. Right after he sends it, this kulak named Kiros, who's been chilling on a mat right behind him, greets him and starts spilling the tea about the city. Turns out, the Phoenician Senate already knows Mahmud's in town and might be planning to call him in as they speak. As for that Imperial ship, yeah, it's a red flag for trouble. When some Senate officials show up to invite Mahmud to meet with Phoenicia's big boss, Magistros Lord Konstantinos, Kiros quickly switches back to acting like a beggar. Mahmud accepts the invite and, on his way to the Senate Council, spots Glalet, someone he recognizes, hanging out in the hallway. Eventually, he makes it to Konstantinos' office and meets the super hyped up leader of the city. After some polite chit-chat, Konstantinos gets straight to business, asking Mahmud to join their emergency meeting to figure out how to deal with a request from the Empire. Apparently, Glalet had asked them to hand over part of their port for the Empire's fleet, and they've only got 10 days to respond. Konstantinos smells something shady, especially since the Empire already took over a place called Theros. There's tension bubbling in other cities, and Konstantinos is all for it. He's actually hoping the Empire makes a move so they can show them what a real empire looks like. The guys stuck on their old glory days and past wins, thinking the Empire's way of ruling with brute force is dumb and unfair. He asks Mahmud to back him up in his little act, and Mahmud's like, sure, why not? In the next scene, Mahmud is at an emergency meeting with Konstantinos and the other senators to figure out how to respond to the Empire's demands. Konstantinos is all for going to war, but the peace-loving senators want to stick to diplomacy. Konstantinos points out that if they give up the lighthouse to the Empire, they might as well let the Empire take over Centro too. And if that happens, Turkey is totally screwed. They can't let that go down. Konstantinos reminds them of the advantages they have over the Empire's forces, but someone else pipes up, saying it's impossible to go up against the Empire. Konstantinos fires back, saying Mahmud Pasha already stood up to the Empire in Hisar and came out on top. He basically turns Mahmud into his ace card, hyping him up as the hero who beat the Empire. Mahmut tries to downplay it, saying Konstantinos is blowing things out of proportion, but it's too late. Everyone in the room starts believing in him. The debate keeps going, and in the end, Konstantinos wins over the majority. To settle things, they call for a vote. While the voting is happening, Konstantinos tells Mahmut about their allies, the Venedict Armada, Centro's strongest naval fleet. He says their navy is way more skilled than the Empire's, which is full of rookies. Mahmut begs him to avoid war, but it's already too far gone. By nightfall, everyone gathers to hear the results. Konstantinos shows up late, holding a lamp, and announces the decision. Most senators voted to fight the Empire and defend their honor. Kulak Kiros sneaks up behind Mahmut and advises him to leave while he still can before things get worse. But Mahmut decides to stay and see it through. Deep down, he's torn up about not being able to stop the war. Konstantinos sends a message to the Empire's envoy, saying they've chosen war and won't back down. Glalat is stunned by their response and signals the Duchess to start moving her fleet toward their territory. Lele sets sail for Phoenician territory and seems to be having a good time while doing it. 15 days later, the Imperial Navy shows up and starts attacking the walls of Phoenicia. The battle goes on all day, but the Imperial Army doesn't make any progress. Konstantinos shows Mahmut how messed up the Imperial Army's strategy is. They send in slaves first to fight and die before letting their real soldiers join the battle. Meanwhile, inside Phoenicia's walls, things stay pretty normal. Konstantinos works hard to keep the people calm and make sure they've got enough food. Mahmut, on the other hand, feels useless and wishes there was something he could have done to stop the war from happening. During their next war meeting, the Phoenician senators start freaking out a bit about their ally taking forever to show up. The trip from Venedict to Phoenicia takes about 9 days, and they sent out the call for help 15 days ago. They're worried Venedict might have bailed on them when they needed them the most. Mahmut, who's been eavesdropping on the meeting, decides to step up and do the unthinkable. He asks for a ship so he can sail through the Imperial Navy's blockade and personally handle things with Venedict. He's determined to figure out what's going on and fix the situation. Konstantinos thanks him for his concern but chooses to trust his buddy, the leader of Venedict, saying he's not the kind of guy to break a promise that easily. Mahmut thinks about Ibrahim and figures Louis must be pulling out all the stops to end the stalemate. Meanwhile, Mahmut has no clue that the Duchess and her crew are already on the other side of the supposedly unbreakable crystal cliffs, ready to climb the ancient 3,000-year-old cliffs and catch the Phoenicians off guard with a sneak attack. Mahmut meets up with Kiros to talk things over before making his next move. Kiros starts opening up about how corrupt his dad is, who also happens to be a senator in Phoenicia. Since he was a kid, Kiros has been disgusted by his dad's shady ways and how far he'll go to get what he wants. Growing up hating everything his dad stood for, Kiros decided he'd never follow in his footsteps. He wandered the city for a while until he got busted by the Phoenician guard and met Suleiman. Back then, Kiros thought he had done a great job sneaking in as a falconer and even mocked Suleiman for catching him. But Suleiman saw the fire in Kiros's eyes and recruited him on the spot to be a kulak. By nightfall, Kiros and Mahmut are walking down a staircase, talking about why Mahmut wants to go to Venedict and bring back reinforcements himself. Mahmut gives him the usual excuse about how Phoenicia can't win the war without Venedict's help, but Kiros calls him out, telling him to cut the crap and spill the real reason he's so desperate to save Phoenicia. Right as Mahmut's about to answer, Kiros's lamp goes out, and the floor beneath Mahmut gives way. Kiros manages to grab him and stop him from falling. Before pulling him back up, Kiros demands the truth. Mahmut carefully chooses his words and finally says he's doing it for his country, Turkey, because it's his duty. He says he's not wrong for putting his nation first, and if Kiros has a problem with that, he's free to let him go. Seeing the conviction in Mahmut's words, Kiros pulls him back up, praises his determination, and promises to get a ship and crew together to break through the Empire's blockade so they can head to Venedict. Meanwhile, Konstantinos is chewing out Kaiserus Apollodorus, giving him grief for ignoring the war. Konstantinos asks if he still thinks going to war with the Empire was the right move. Konstantinos doubles down, saying he still believes it was the right call. But Apollodorus isn't really on his side and thinks they're making a huge mistake. He tells Konstantinos to get off his high horse because if he doesn't, who knows what'll happen to the Phoenicians. Mahmut is hanging back, quietly watching the whole argument go down. At the same time, Glalat orders the slaves on his ship to gear up for their 4th suicide mission. He's planning to send them to climb the wall and take the hit from Phoenician arrows to buy the Duchess time to sneak up the crystal wall from the back. The slaves, totally fed up with being treated like disposable pawns, start hatching a plan to escape the next night. Glalat switches up the guards and keeps sticking to Louis's orders. Meanwhile, Mahmut tracks down Kiros on the outskirts of the city. Kiros takes him to a safe spot and helps him go undercover while the crew loads up their escape ship with supplies. Mahmut changes into his disguise and makes Kiros promise to survive this mission. By nightfall, they're checking for any leftover supplies to make sure they're ready. Mahmut gets to know some of the crew as they all share a few moments before things get crazy. After hearing their pep talks and chatter, Mahmut thanks them for risking their necks to be part of this. Once they've got everything prepped, the only thing left is to quietly drop the harbor chains without tipping anyone off. Mahmut and Kiros sneak into the control room to lower the chains manually. Right as they're about to get to work, they stop to eavesdrop on what's happening upstairs. Turns out, The slaves from earlier have already reached the gates of Phoenicia on a smaller ship and are ready to surrender to the Magistros. At first, the Phoenicians think it's a trap set by the Empire to trick them into opening the gates. But then, the leader of the rebellion starts spilling his sob story, saying they're miners from another country and don't even know if their families are still alive. Kiros and Mammut listen in through the communication pipes as the deserters plead their case. Before they can finish, the Imperial soldiers start firing arrows at their ship, making the Phoenicians think the deserters are legit. With the Imperial Navy closing in fast, the deserters keep begging the Phoenicians to let them in. Konstantinos mulls it over and decides to give them a shot. To avoid any backlash, he calls for a vote, which ends up going his way. They start working on raising the harbor chains, but first, they do some calculations to make sure the tides are on their side. The Imperial fleet notices what's going on and speeds up to try to get through the inner gates before the deserters make it inside. The math whiz from Phoenicia does some quick number crunching and figures out they've got enough time to shut the gates before the Imperial Navy rolls into town if they hustle. Konstantinos wastes no time and drops the harbor chains, opening up a path for the deserters to sail into the city. Once the deserters hear the chains are down, they paddle like crazy to reach the dock before the Imperial army shows up. As soon as they're in, the chains start going back up. But then Konstantinos notices the Imperial Navy ditched their ballast to make their ships lighter and faster. Nikephoros, the math guy, recalculates and realizes they're not gonna make it. Still, they keep cranking the chains up as fast as they can. Just when they think they've got it, the seasonal winds kick in, giving the Imperial Navy an extra boost. Eventually, Glalat busts into the city's docks. Konstantinos scrambles, ordering all his soldiers to surround the ship and stop it from docking. He also gets the bad news that none of their ships were prepped ahead of time. Frustrated, he takes a moment to stew over his mistakes before figuring out his next move. Apollodorus watches the whole mess unfold, shaking his head in regret, waiting for some kind of miracle. Luckily, Mammut and Kiros manage to sail out just in time. They ram Glalat's ship, board it, and start taking on the crew. Mammut calls his eagle, which swoops down and drops nails on the enemy fighters. After taking down the Elvaldes mountain troops, Mammut and his crew round up the survivors and head below deck to clear out any stragglers. When Kiros and the others make it topside, Glalat crawls back onto the deck of his wrecked ship. He spots Mammut holding a woman and challenges him to a fight. Before they start swinging swords, Glalat recognizes Mammut as the eagle guy he saw back in Phoenicia. Without saying much, Glalat lets his sword do the talking. They trade blows, and Glalat tries to psych Mammut out with some trash talk. Mammut pauses and calls his eagle, Iskender, for backup. Iskender swoops in, distracting Glalat, who throws oil on him. Glalat keeps pressing the attack and nearly takes Mammut down, but one of Mammut's men suddenly drops the ship's anchor. The jolt throws Glalat off balance, and he gets captured. Kiros shows up, ties Glalat and his crew up, and offers them a deal: surrender and live. But Glalat just keeps running his mouth, stalling for time so the Duchess and her warriors can sneak into the city. Mammut doesn't catch on to the plan, and keeps listening to Glalat, who eventually spills Louis' scheme for his homeland. Meanwhile, Glalat and his men decide to go down swinging, aiming to take Mammut and his crew with them. Mammut and Kiros waste time entertaining Glalat's nonsense. By the time they realize what's up, Mammut looks back and sees Phoenicia engulfed in flames. The Duchess and her warriors have already climbed the city's unbreakable walls and broken in. Mammut watches in disbelief as the city he thought was invincible burns to the ground right in front of him. Soon, the other folks in the Phoenician state, including the clueless dude Konstantinos, spot the fire tearing through their homes and families in the distance. Meanwhile, the Phoenician Senate starts to piece things together and realizes the naval attack was just a big old distraction to keep their eyes off the land army, sneaking in to wreck them. They were doomed from the jump because they didn't have someone like Louis, a straight-up chess master, cooking up their game plan. While the Senate is losing their minds, Konstantinos stubbornly tells his people not to give up hope. The poor guy really thinks his wishful thinking is enough to save their already sinking city. But honestly, the Senate doesn't even take him seriously anymore. This dude still has the nerve to shout out orders, telling his troops to hold off the Imperial soldiers while waiting for the Venedict Armada to come save the day. He even tries yelling at the troops through the sound pipes, but Apollodorus had already filled them with water to block any more of his nonsense. At one point, Apollodorus confronts Konstantinos face to face and shows him the mess he's dragged Phoenicia into. He's worried that if they keep listening to this guy's trash commands, the whole city will be wiped out by morning. Konstantinos keeps ranting about his ideals, but Apollodorus just tunes him out. Instead, Apollodorus gets the senators to vote on whether to surrender to the Imperial army or not. By the end of the vote, everyone's on board with surrendering. Konstantinos looks at everyone like they stabbed him in the back and decides he'd rather end it all than watch his city fall under the Empire's control, but Apollodorus stops him from doing something stupid and finally waves the white flag to surrender. That day, the Imperial army makes history as the first and only force to break through the supposedly unbreakable crystal wall. They call it a win right then and there. Mahmut and his crew quickly realize it's way too risky to stick around, so they quietly sail out of the nation's waters to dodge the Imperial army. As for the Phoenician soldiers, they ditch their posts and rush home to protect their families. Meanwhile, Kiros and his squad manage to smuggle the badly injured Mahmut out of the city. Now, all they gotta do is sneak him out of enemy waters to find a doctor who can patch him up. Before hopping off the little ship, Kiros promises his crew he'll come back for them. But they know Mahmut Pasha is gonna need someone to have his back, so they tell Kiros to stick with him while they hold things down in the city and wait for him to return and take it back from the Empire. Mahmut gets out of bed, still looking rough, and thanks Kiros' crew for having his back. Elsewhere, Konstantinos is standing face to face with the Duchess. He's still running his mouth about his dumb ideas on how power should be used, but the Duchess quickly reminds him how weak his words are compared to those with real power. She slashes his shoulder, letting him see his life flash before his eyes, and then finishes him off. Apollodorus and the other senators show up to back the Empire as the Phoenician War officially comes to an end. A few hours after sailing away from Phoenici, Mahmut and Kiros finally relax, knowing they're out of enemy range. They keep sailing for about 4 more hours before running into the Venedic Armada fleet. At the same time, the fleet's captain spots them and orders his crew to bring everyone on the boat up to the deck. When Kiros and the injured Mahmut get there, the captain introduces himself as Silvestro Brega and offers them asylum on his ship out of respect for the alliance with Phoenici. But instead of taking the offer, Mahmut, ignoring his injuries, demands to know why they abandoned Phoenici to fend for itself against the Imperial soldiers. Brega fires back, saying they never betrayed Phoenici. Apparently, they made all the necessary preparations as soon as they got the request from Phoenici and set sail. Mahmut doesn't buy it and tries to press him for the truth, but he collapses into Abiriga's arms. Abiriga, another big shot on the fleet, allows Mahmut to be taken to his quarters to recover over the next few days. While Mahmut is getting treated, he drifts off into a dream, trying to figure out what went wrong. All Konstantinos did was trust the Doge of Venedic, Lucio, a little too much. Is it so wrong to form alliances based on trust? Is he missing something? Did something happen to Venedic that made them hesitate to help Phoenici? These questions keep spinning in Mahmut's head, but he can't come up with any answers. The one thing he does know is that he still has a lot to learn. For now, he rests and wakes up a few days later. One morning, Kiros comes into Mahmut's room to feed Iskender, who's acting aggressive towards him. Mahmut just lies there, wondering how the captain can stay so calm and collected after betraying a 200-year-old alliance. Kiros doesn't really have an answer, but figures maybe the people of Venedic are just jerks by nature. Obviously, Mahmut isn't satisfied with that. His curiosity pushes him to figure out what really happened, no matter what it takes. His first step is to dig into the history of Venedic, so he grabs a book he finds nearby and starts reading. So, Kiros is sneaking around and overhears a chat between Abiriga and the captain. Once their talk wraps up, Kiros tails Abiriga to the ship's railings and sees him toss a bouquet into the ocean as a tribute to Konstantinos, their fallen comrade who made some dumb choices. Kiros thinks this is pretty cold-hearted toward a teammate, so he confronts Abiriga to get the real story. Abiriga just shrugs it off, saying he's following the captain's orders. Kiros heads back to Mahmut to spill everything he's found out. Mahmut mulls it over and asks Kiros if he's ever met Doge Lucio before. Kiros says he met him as a kid, but didn't really pay attention to what his dad was talking about with the guy. Now though, it's obvious they didn't care much about the deal they made. Mahmut thanks Kiros for the info and starts piecing together the details of the agreement. Basically, Phoenici was supposed to back Venedic's trade and economy, and in return, Venedic would provide military support to Phoenici. If Doge Lucio had some other motive beyond trust, Mahmut was determined to figure it out. He spends days jotting down his thoughts in his diary until he's finally strong enough to walk out on the deck by himself. Once he's out there, Mahmut soaks in the sea breeze and heads straight to Brega's quarters. He thanks Brega for helping him out and asks for a small favor when they get back to Venedic. Mahmut wants Brega to set up a private meeting between him and Doge Lucio. Brega agrees and promises to make it happen. A few days later, they reach Venedic's shores. Kiros tells Mahmut he's sticking around for the long haul because he's curious to see what kind of Pasha Mahmut will become. When they dock, Abiriga gets them onto a small boat to sail to the Doge's private crib. On the way, Abiriga gives Mahmut a crash course on Venedic's history. Turns out, Venedic is kind of a free-for-all place where people ended up after escaping war and captivity. Over time, they got rich and split themselves into 5 elemental groups: water, earth, fire, metal, and tree, so they could trace their roots. Abiriga finally reveals that he's the leader of Captain Brega's private militia. Mahmut acknowledges him and finally arrives at the Doge's place. There, he confronts the Doge and straight up asks why he betrayed Phoenici. Before Mahmut and Kiros showed up in Venice, Doge Lucio made sure he got the lowdown on everything that went down during the Phoenician War. After hearing the general updates, Doge Lucio got super curious about the Pasha who's not into war. He invited Mahmut to hang out and have dinner with him for a few days before Mahmut headed back to his homeland. Now that Mahmoud's standing in front of him, the young guy isn't playing nice. He straight up asks Doge Lucio why he ditched Constantinos and Foiniki. After hearing Mahmoud's demands, Doge Lucio starts explaining the whole deal between Venice and Foiniki. He points out a clause in their treaty, saying Venice's army has to back Foiniki up in case of war, since Foiniki's been hooking them up financially for ages. But then, the shady Doge twists it, saying the treaty never said Venice's fleet actually had to reach Foiniki. Basically, he found a loophole and is acting like it's no big deal. Kiros, clearly pissed, calls him a con artist for pulling such a dirty move on an ally. He brings up how Foiniki fought like champs for 17 days before falling to the Empire, which was plenty of time for Venice's fleet to show up. Mahmoud calms Kiros down and then asks the Doge what he thinks about the Empire taking over the Central Waters. Doge Lucio, still smug, starts talking about Venice's famous glass, which is made from crystals Foiniki ships out every year. He figures Foiniki will keep exporting those crystals no matter who's in charge, so why stress about a new boss when he can just cut a deal with the Empire? Mahmoud fires back, calling out how slimy the Empire is and warning Lucio that they might screw him over too. But Lucio doesn't budge. He says he never trusted Foiniki in the first place and only made the alliance for business. Then Mahmoud brings up Constantinos getting killed by Imperial soldiers. That hits Lucio a little, but he keeps his cool and keeps treating Mahmoud like a kid. He tells Mahmoud there's no point in picking a fight with the Empire unless they start something first. If they do, Venice will hit back hard, but for now, they're staying quiet. The two of them keep going back and forth about diplomacy and all that jazz, until Lucio finally sends the young Pasha off to explore Venice and cool down. On their way through the city, Mahmoud and Kiros are chatting about how the meeting went. Mahmoud keeps his cool and doesn't let his feelings take over. This time, he actually notices the skill in Lucio's words, even though the guy's just a useless jerk trying to use people for his own gain. After that, they start looking for kulaks in the city. Right then, Abiriga shows up and tells them there aren't any kulaks around. Once he catches up with them, Abiriga takes them to Brega's restaurant, which is now run by Brega's wife. While they're there, they talk about stuff going on in the Centro Sea, like how they assign captains to different areas on the continent. After hearing all this talk about the region, Mahmoud asks why there aren't any kulaks in the city. Abiriga explains that Venedict made it clear to Suleiman that they didn't need spies because they already act as spies for every nation. Even back when he was younger, Abiriga impressed Suleiman with his skills, but Suleiman got stuck in a tricky spot when he realized no one wanted to betray their country or favor another one. After hearing all of this, Kiros decides there's no point in staying in Venedict. Just as he's about to say what's on his mind, Brega's wife shows up with more food. Kiros is so blown away by how beautiful she is that he just sits there silently, staring at her. She notices Kiros looking at her like he's seen an angel and starts talking about how much Abiriga means to them. She explains that Abiriga was born a slave and was passed around from one master to another. But one day, Brega saw his potential and paid 5 times the usual price to buy him back then. Now, Abiriga has grown into a man with honor and class. She also mentions that Abiriga is the one who scarred Brega's face, and he's been apologizing for it ever since. Right before they finish their meal, an alarm goes off in the distance. It looks like there's been a shipwreck. Abiriga gets up to check out what's going on and finds out that the Kelowna Company's ship has sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Not long after, 3 chubby merchants show up at the restaurant, demanding that Abiriga pay back the money he borrowed to invest in the company. Brega shows up at the worst possible time and backs up their story. He makes it sound like Abiriga committed a serious crime and ends up sentencing him to exile. That night, Mahmoud asks Abiriga why he didn't tell the captain what he used the money for. Abiriga says he didn't want the captain to treat him differently or save him, because that would look bad to the people of Venedict. He thinks it's better this way. Not long after, Abiriga gets arrested. He thanks Mahmoud for helping him, gives him some kind of map, and goes with the guards. A few minutes later, Mahmoud and Kiros are walking around Venedict at night when they overhear those 3 greedy merchants bragging about how easy it was to trick Abiriga and the captain. After hearing enough to know they're guilty, Mahmoud and Kiros confront them, calling them out for their lies and accusing them of setting Abiriga up. Unfortunately, Venedict doesn't have any laws against lying without proof or letting someone walk into a bad situation, so Mahmoud can't do anything about it. After dealing with those jerks, Mahmoud decides to help Abiriga. To do this, he comes up with a military-style plan. Meanwhile, Abiriga talks to the captain from his cell and asks Brega if it's really worth letting people believe in their fake story. Brega says it's worth it because they want to see what kind of leader Mahmoud will become. At the same time, Mahmoud challenges 20 chess masters in Venedict to play him all at once. He plays hard and wins about 700 ducats in one match. The chess masters get mad and demand their money back, but Brega's wife shuts them down, reminding them they're still in her restaurant. Everyone backs off and leaves. When Brega gets home, his wife tells him that the boy they brought to the city has guts. The next day, just as Abiriga is about to be sent away to some far-off place, Mahmoud steps in. He uses the 700 ducats to buy Abiriga's freedom from Brega. Abiriga admits to to his lies and apologizes. Mahmoud accepts the apology and lets Brega pitch Abiriga's skills to him. In the end, Mahmoud buys Abiriga's freedom and welcomes him to his crew. After they leave the city, Lucio sails out to meet Brega to talk about Mahmoud. Brega thinks Mahmoud is young and inexperienced, but Lucio believes Mahmoud has the potential to become a great leader because he's eager to learn and has the imagination to back it up. As they sail off, Kiros asks Mahmoud if he's okay with the risk of Abiriga sharing their secrets with Venedik. Mahmoud says it's worth the risk because they might need Venedik's help someday. Just before Venedik disappears from view, the bell from Foinike rings, and Lucio mourns the loss of his best friend, Konstantinos. Mahmoud moves on from his time in Foinike and looks forward to new experiences with Abiriga. After the Foinike War ended, the Balt-Rhine Empire snagged another prime spot along the Centro trade route. To reward Duchess Lele for her part in the win, the emperor promised her half the taxes from their new turf. This whole situation freaked out the nations in the Berlik-Torkie Federation. About 13 days after Foinike fell, the sultans of the four smaller nations called for an emergency meeting, hosted by the top dog nation, Torkie Pashalu. The meeting was all about deciding whether to go with a motion Torkie Pashalu came up with 12 years ago. At the meeting, the four sultans Balaban of Muzrak, Selim of Kuluch, Uzun of Bechka, and Fatma of Balta were all respected leaders in their regions. They had to vote on whether to accept the proposal from Torkie Pashalu. When the votes came in, everyone was stunned. The four of them shot the proposal down, rejecting what their parent nation wanted. After the meeting, Zaganos and Suleiman had a chat about the growing unrest and how to stop a rebellion from popping off. Zaganos suggested that Torkie Pashalu pull some shady moves, take over the four smaller nations, and create a Torkian union. Just then, Saluja Pasha, one of the peace-loving types, showed up and warned Zaganos that the sultans might start demanding equal rights and freedom to make their own calls. He told Zaganos not to do anything reckless, warning that it could lead to a civil war down the line. Zaganos listened to the guy ramble for a bit, but as soon as he left, Zaganos decided he wasn't going to waste time with the sultans when they needed to get ready for the empire's invasion, which could happen any day now. Meanwhile, Mahmud was traveling around the four smaller nations, learning about their history. Right now, he was hanging out in Muzrak, strolling through the town square, when a weapons dealer passed by. Abiriga tipped him off, and they followed the trail to a locked-up building. After scoping out the place, Abiriga led Mahmud and his colleague through a maze of tunnels to sneak inside. They crawled through the tunnels and made it to the inner rooms. Once there, they had to fight off a guard before Mahmud could even say who he was. Soon after, two important-looking people showed up. One introduced himself as Bayezid, the brother of Sultan Balaban, and pointed to the sharp-looking woman next to him, Princess Aishi, the daughter of Sultan Fatma of Balta. Bayezid mentioned he was the Kulak, a spy or informant of the area, which caught Mahmud off guard. Mahmud asked why a sultan's brother would take a job like that, and Bayezid said it's just how things are now. Aisha started throwing shade at Mahmud, trying to mess with him, but Mahmud stayed calm and kept asking Bayezid why he was hiding out in this building. Bayezid explained what went down at the recent meeting, which surprised Mahmud. Mahmud then asked for a meeting with Bayezid's brother, but Bayezid warned him that his brother was dangerous and unpredictable. Even so, Mahmud wasn't about to back down, so Bayezid told him where to find his brother, curious to see what would come out of their meeting. Mahmud and his crew finally roll up to Balaban's camp, where he spots the famous Yenicheri squad. Mahmud's blown away by how many troops Balaban has pulled together in the meantime, but he keeps his cool and asks for a meeting with the Sultan anyway. Meanwhile, Bayezid catches wind of how many soldiers his brothers stacked up to come after him. Knowing it's only a matter of time before Balaban shows up, Bayezid tells his crew to get ready to bail and smokes them out of the building. While that's going down, Mahmud heads to Balaban's tent, shows his respect, and straight up asks why Balaban ditched the Berlik-Torkie alliance. Mahmud reminds him that sticking together ups their chances of survival if a bigger power, like the Empire, decides to invade. Balaban listens to Mahmud, but then tells him straight up that his nation can go screw itself. He's done letting them treat his people like garbage. If they won't give his nation equal rights, then they can fight the Empire on their own. Mahmud asks if Balaban's trying to start a civil war, but Balaban says he's just going to shut down anyone who stands in his way. As for his brother Bayezid, who's holed up in the water shrine, Balaban says he'll deal with him soon. Before wrapping up their talk, Balaban asks Mahmud how he feels about Torkie demoting him. Balaban figures Mahmud should be pissed at his country for wasting his skills, but Mahmud admits he was young and clueless back then, so he deserved it. He says he still loves his homeland, no matter what they do to him. At that point, Balaban makes up his mind he's never bowing to Torquie's demands, period. And as for Bayezid, Balaban calls him a disgrace and vows to take him down, no matter what. When they reach the shrine, Balaban calls out Bayezid and Aishi, labeling them traitors and enemies of the state. Mahmud asks why Balaban thinks Aishi is a traitor, and Balaban explains it's because she tried to pull off a failed coup against her mom earlier. Kiros leans over to Mahmud and whispers that they should have bailed while Balaban was distracted. When the time's right, Balaban sets the entire water shrine on fire. Inside, Bayezid and Aisha trigger some kind of water-draining mechanism to help them escape. After pulling this stunt, Balaban formally invites Mahmut to his quarters. Meanwhile, Suleiman gets a letter from Mahmut spilling all the tea about what went down in the city. When Zaganos hears about Bayezid's recent death, he starts scheming for the next divan meeting. This time, he pitches a plan to the 13 Pashas: use someone disposable to take down the 4 Sultanate stratocracies. That way, even if the assassin gets caught, no one can trace it back to Torquier Pashalu. Saluja stands up to challenge Zaganos, calling his plan cowardly and dumb, but Zaganos claps back, reminding everyone they don't have time to waste because they need to get ready for the empire. Saluja suggests meeting the demands of the 4 nations to smooth things over, but Zaganos doesn't buy it. Saluja keeps rambling until Zaganos shuts him down, saying the satellite nations don't give a damn about the Federation anymore. Zaganos promises that if the Pashas trust him with this mission, he'll get it done. That night, Zaganos gets the green light to plan the coup. He picks Mahmut, a pretty disposable soldier, to pull it off and take down all 4 sultans before it's too late. He shares the plan with Suleiman and explains his reasons. Suleiman gets the gist of the political move and heads off to Muzrak. Mahmut keeps checking out Balaban's palace. His guys, Kiros and Abariga, get distracted by the cool fountain and wander off to check it out, leaving Mahmut behind. Later, when it gets dark, they all chow down and fill up. After dinner, the 3 of them sneak out of the palace, quietly taking out a bunch of guards on their way to the gates. Meanwhile, Eleanor catches Balaban leaving his quarters and asks why he hasn't taken care of Mahmut yet. Balaban brushes her off, saying not to sweat it because he's got plans for the kid. While Mahmut and his crew sneak out through the sewers dressed as Yenicheri soldiers, Balaban and his men find the guards they took out and sound the alarm. Mahmut thinks about trying to talk things out with Balaban, but they all know it's way too late for that. Instead, they slip into the next Yenicheri roll call, which Balaban is leading, and try to stay under the radar. Balaban starts the roll call, letting a few soldiers pass until he gets to Mahmut and Kirosbut. Not Abiragan calls them out. When Balaban catches Mahmut, he's clearly pissed and promises to burn Mahmut's face to a crisp. Right then, the fountain nearby goes haywire, and Abariga uses the water to put out the torches. After that, he takes down all the guards in the courtyard, including Balaban, and helps his crew escape back into the sewers. Mahmut and the gang keep moving through the sewers until they finally run into Eleanor and Rod Orm at the other end. Eleanor kicks off the convo by telling Mahmut she's been waiting to see him for a hot minute. Mahmut and his crew eventually figure out that the Empire's minister, Louis, is mixed up in the shady moves of the 4 stratocracies. After hearing Mahmut's take on it, Eleanor decides she can't let him live. Mahmut's like, "Bring it on," and tells her he won't hold back against her fancy little lackeys. Eleanor drops her smug attitude, whips out her long, flexible sword, and the fight's on. Mahmut teams up with his crew and his eagle, Iskender, and not only disarms Eleanor but also takes down the other assassins. With his sword at Eleanor's neck, Mahmut glares at her skinny, annoying self and warns her not to mess with him again. He reminds her this is the 2nd time he's beaten her, and there won't be a 3rd next time. She's dead for real. Eleanor tries to buy herself some time by begging for mercy, but when Mahmut talks trash about her boss Louis, she claps back. Eventually, Balaban and his Yenicheris roll up to take Balaban back. While Mahmut's distracted, Eleanor slips out of his grip and barely escapes with her life. Mahmut and his crew find a spot to lay low and wait for a miracle. Just when they're about to give up hope, Suleiman shows up with the goofballs Bayezid and Aishi to save the day. Mahmut hops on with them and manages to get away from Balaban. Later, during a debrief with Suleiman, Mahmut vents that Balaban is a stubborn pain in the ass, and as long as he's running Muzrak, there's no way the Brillik-Torquier Federation can come together. After hearing Mahmut out, Suleiman spills the tea about the Divan's plan to make Mahmut the leader of an anti-Sultan rebellion. If Mahmut agrees, his job will be to overthrow all 4 sultans within a set time. Kiros smells something fishy and calls them out, accusing them of making Mahmut the fall guy for their shady schemes. Mahmut brushes it off and asks Bayezid and Aishi if they're down with the plan. They're cool with it, so Mahmut gives the nod and agrees to the Divan's orders. Meanwhile, back in Torquia, Saluja Pasha is seen ripping into Zaganos for deciding to overthrow the sultans. Zaganos ignores him at first, but eventually snaps and calls Saluja out for being an idealistic idiot instead of facing reality. Saluja rides off, deciding he's going to handle things his own way. The next morning, Mahmut and his new squad head to another sultanate to kick off their mission. On the way, Mahmut appoints Bayezid and Aishi as the pro-Torki leaders for Muzrak and Balta. For now, the plan can only move forward if they can find 2 more leaders for Buchak and Kuluch. Mahmut racks his brain to come up with candidates to take over once the current sultans are out of the picture. Suleiman keeps riding until they reach Buchak's capital. When they get there, they find wanted posters with their faces plastered all over the city walls. Since they can't just stroll into the city, Suleiman comes up with a plan to disguise himself and Mahmut as a married couple. The plan works, and soon enough, they're inside the city. While walking through town, Suleiman explains a business deal that'll go down the drain if the Brillik-Torki fall falls apart. By night, Zaganos reads a message from Suleiman to catch up on what they've been up to. Around that time, Suleiman takes Mahmut and the crew to check out the new road the Buchak engineers are working on. It's supposed to link the Empire with Buchak and work as a trade hotspot between the two. If they finish this road, Buchak could finally sell their gems for way more cash than they're getting now. When Mahmut hears this, he realizes the Empire is trying to buy Buchak with money, and if the road gets done before they take out the 4 current sultans, then Berlik Torki could be toast. To stop this, Mahmut splits the group in two. One team will handle Buchak, and the other will deal with the Sultan in Kuluch. Aisha volunteers to go to Kuluch since she knows the Sultan there. After hearing this, Mahmut tells Suleiman and Bayezid to find a ruler for Buchak, while the rest of the squad heads to Kuluch. By the crack of dawn the next day, they roll into Kuluch and meet Aishi's fiancé, Prince Orhan. But this dude's a total wimp with the guts of a clueless idiot. Seriously, he's such a coward that his wife has to keep him calm. Anyway, Mahmut and the gang settle into a villa where Orhan serves them fresh fruit. Aishi doesn't waste time and straight up asks Orhan to set up a meeting with his dad. Orhan warns her it's risky since even he barely remembers what his dad looks like. Salim's always wearing a mask, but Aishi doesn't care about that kind of stuff. Eventually, they get their meeting with Salim. Mahmut tells his crew not to kill Salim if they get the chance, so they can figure out why he's always hiding behind a mask. Soon, Selim shows up and greets them, keeping it pretty straightforward. He and Aishi trade some sarcastic jabs, with Aishi reminding him how weak his nation is compared to the other sultanates. Selim fires back, saying he's tight with Balaban and has no beef with him. Then, out of nowhere, Selim calls in his warriors to draw their swords on Mahmut. To avoid a fight, Mahmut calms everyone down, but he starts suspecting something's off about Salim's attitude. Maybe the Empire has spies keeping tabs on him. Anyway, Selim has his men lock Mahmut and the crew up in the 9th tower until Balaban shows up. Right after they're thrown in, the agents reveal themselves, and Mahmut realizes he was right all along. While Prince Orhan bawls over his dad's betrayal, Abariga finds a weak spot in the tower and tells Mahmut about it. Just then, a secret door swings open, and Selim shows his real face. First, he apologizes for acting weird earlier, and says betraying the Berlik Torquier was a tough pill to swallow. Now, he's on board with whatever Mahmut's planning and lets him know. Selim explains that his nation is tiny, with no army or money, so he doesn't have much power to stand up to the other 3 sultanates. Aishi comes up with a sneaky new plan to help make their takeover a success. If Selim can set up a wedding for herself and the prince, they can gather all the sultans in one room and take them out. If the sultans skip the wedding, then Selim can just go through with the marriage and stir up trouble later. Selim's down with the plan, so he starts getting everything ready the next day. After sending out the invites in the morning, Mahmut and Abariga talk about the chance that Kuluch might double-cross them and strike a deal for their own benefit. Mahmut keeps his options open and asks Aisha if she's cool with marrying someone she doesn't love. Aisha sees how sharp Mahmut is and tells him she's been trained to handle an arranged marriage like it's no big deal. Plus, the guy she likes might not even like her back, so there's no point stressing over it. Meanwhile, miles away, Suleiman and Bayezid are on the run after Buchak's soldiers spot them. Around the same time, Bayolu Ismail, one of Uzun's 45 sons, shows up just in time with treasures from distant lands for his dad. After the pleasantries, Ismail notices some troublemakers causing chaos and asks his dad for permission to hunt them down and deal with them before things get worse. Uzun gives him the green light, and Ismail hires the Orquesta mercenary group he had lined up earlier to capture Suleiman and Bayezid. Once he's got them, Ismail has a chat with them and admits he's on their side, wanting to be under the protection of the Berlik Torki. Suleiman agrees with the plan and waits for Ismail to make his next move. Ismail then asks what Torkia Pashalu is willing to pitch in to make the rebellion work. Suleiman mentions a small number of men and supplies, but Ismail's not impressed. They'll need way more than 5,000 men from Kuluch to go up against the 23,000 soldiers from the other 3 sultanates. Bayezid steps in before Ismail makes a hasty decision and invites him to see something he's been keeping under wraps. Trusting him, Ismail follows Bayezid and finally gets to check out his secret weapon, the Shark Ye, and it's not just one, it's 77 of them. Right then and there, Ismail locks in his deal with Bayezid to rebel against his dad. Before diving back into the main story, there's a flashback showing how Bayezid and Aishi fell for each other. From the looks of it, Aishi is head over heels for Bayezid. Back in the day, Balaban was with them in the forest when he realized how sharp Bayezid was. That same day, Balaban made a promise to always have Bayezid's back and use his smarts to help rebuild Muzrak. Now, all 3 of them are sitting around lost in thought, reminiscing about those good times. A few days later, a divan meeting is held with the pashas of Torkiye Pashalu to talk about Mahmut's plan to overthrow the sultans of the 4 neighboring nations. Some of the more aggressive pashas were all for it, while the pacifists and clueless idiots were against it. Saluja, who's basically the king of dumbasses, gets up and asks the head pasha if he can be Torkiye Pashalu's representative at the wedding. The head pasha gives him the green light, and Saluja thanks him. As they leave the capital, Zaganos watches them go, fully aware that Buyuk Buyuk Pasha, the head Pasha, sent them on a suicide mission. But hey, Saluja kind of deserved it, so there's that. In the next scene, Mahmud and his crew meet up with Beyoğlu Ismail in Ecchi, the capital of Kuluç, to talk about the wedding plan. Ismail doesn't have a problem with the plan itself, but suggests they let the wedding happen without any assassinations. Then, once Orhan becomes sultan, they could use Kuluç's soldiers to attack the other three nations. Mahmud isn't on board with this, saying a civil war would just divide the people too much. Ismail then asks how Mahmud plans to get the people to overlook the assassination, and Mahmud tells him to meet him at the Circle Plaza in 3 nights. 3 nights later, Ismail and the other Torkians show up at the Circle Plaza for a stage play that paints the current sultans as evil villains working with the empire. The play goes on for a while before wrapping up. Afterward, Mahmud and Ismail see the plan starting to take shape. Mahmud thanks Shara and her crew for helping pull it off and tells them to keep performing the play for 6 more months if he doesn't make it. Shara tells him to quit being so dramatic and focus on staying alive. Later that night, Mahmud talks to Kiros about the plan, saying they'll need the people on their side if things go sideways. Meanwhile, Abiriga chats with Ecchi about what'll happen if the sultans don't show up to her wedding. If that happens, Orhan will take over as sultan and use military force to make the other nations fall in line. Ecchi seems confident, but she doubts Balaban will just sit back and do nothing. Speaking of Balaban, he's seen talking to Saluja, who's dumb enough to think Balaban's a saint. Saluja spills the beans, telling Balaban that the Divan suspects him of making deals with the empire to take them down. Balaban, unfazed, pats Saluja on the shoulder and thanks him for sharing the Divan's secrets. For now, Balaban plans to bring his 10 Yenicheris to the wedding. Saluja, still clueless, thanks him for being such a good guy and heads off to his room. Later that night, Balaban remembers the moment he found out about his dad's death. Turns out, his dad was used as a pawn in one of Torkiye's political games. Balaban's pissed at the Berlik Torkiye and wants payback. So, he tells his crew to let the sultans of Buchak and Balta know to get their armies ready. They're gonna march on Kuluç and crush them with everything they've got. Meanwhile, word gets out about Saluja's betrayal, and it reaches the Divan. Buyuk Pasha sees this as his chance to make a move. Instead of calling Saluja out for being an idiot, he decides to stab Balaban in the back. While Balaban's off fighting at Kuluç, Buyuk plans to hit Balaban's country when it's wide open. Like clockwork, Zaganos sides with Buyuk. Against all odds, Buyuk puts Zaganos in charge of the armies to get the ball rolling. At the same time, Balaban hooks up with Fatma and rides with her in her carriage to talk about the war that's about to go down. Mahmud and his crew, on the other hand, are busy planning their positions for the wedding. They want everything set up perfectly so they can take out all the sultans. Ecchi tries on her wedding dress but complains about how hard it'll be to fight with such a heavy and fancy gown. Bayezid shows up and offers to help her train outside, and she's down for it. During their private training session, Ecchi thinks back to the good times she used to have with Bayezid. After they finish, they sit and watch the sunset, talking about their biggest dreams. In the middle of the convo, Ecchi realizes Bayezid felt the same way she did. They both thought they'd end up getting married. But now, that's not how things are. Poor Orhan overhears their chat from nearby. The dude's heart shatters, and he ends up crying alone in some dark hallway. Selim finds his son bawling on the stairs, sits him down, and gives him a pep talk. He tells Orhan to stop being a wuss and step up so Ecchi can see him as someone worth loving. Orhan takes his dad's advice and promises to change. As the wedding prep continues, Ayşe pulls Mahmud aside to remind him why the Turkian government picked him for this mission. Mahmud assures her he knows the risks and says he's ready to face them. Seeing the fire in Mahmud's eyes, Bayezid feels a twinge of jealousy. It reminds him of the day he found out his brother betrayed the Turkian alliance. Bayezid wasn't just heartbroken, he was crushed that his brother chose the wrong side. If push comes to shove, Bayezid is ready to do whatever it takes to save Muzrak, even if it means taking his brother out. The next day arrives in a flash, and the city of Kuluç gets ready for the big celebration. Just as the ceremony is about to kick off, Mahmud gets a heads up from Zaganos about an army heading their way. Mahmud looks out and spots 20,000 soldiers marching toward Kuluç. Wasting no time, he sends Kiros to evacuate the townspeople while Abiriga and Suleiman make sure Sultan Selim is safe from the Empire's agents. After giving out all the orders, Mahmud gets back to fine-tuning his assassination plan. The Sultan rolls up into his son's room, ready to take him out and stick his head on a spike. Orhan's begging his dad to chill, while Ayşe whips out her sword and squares up with the guards. Meanwhile, Ismail, Bayezid, and the crew are gearing up for a fight as they head to the palace's military quarters. Ayşe and her fiancé eventually get outnumbered, and Orhan has to hold a knife to his dad's throat to stop the guards from killing his girl. Elsewhere, Abiriga and Suleiman track down some Empire agents and take them out. As they make their way to Selim's room, Orhan's hit with another challenge. His dad asks if he's ready to leave their small kingdom to fight Balaban, even if it means getting wrecked. Orhan, being the clueless idiot of the century, just stands there looking dumb, admitting he he doesn't know jack about war or politics. The Sultan's over it at this point. He shoves Orhan aside and goes for Ecchi, but before he can hurt her, Orhan gets up and stabs his dad in the back. Selim, realizing what's up, accepts his son's choice and tells him to stay strong, since he's about to be the new Sultan. Right then, Abiriga and Suleiman walk in and see Selim in Orhan's arms. Meanwhile, Mahmut's struggling to handle Kuluch's army of 5-0 men. The cocky captain refuses to move without hearing from the Sultan first, not wanting to risk his troops in the upcoming war. They're about to make a huge mistake when Orhan finally grows a pair and takes charge like a boss. He shows them his dad's mask, proving he's taken over, and orders the captain to follow Mahmut's lead. The captain bows down to the new Sultan, and Mahmut gets what he needs. To figure out what caused the beef between Balaban and Bayezid, we get a flashback that breaks it down. Turns out, Bayezid's love for his brother went south when he caught him cutting deals with some jerk from the Empire, Louis. By the time Bayezid shows up at his brother's palace, Louis is already there working his angle. Louis sweet-talks the Sultan of Muzrak, pretends to feel bad about the Empire killing the Sultan's dad, and then pulls out a map he drew on some papyrus. Balaban checks out the map and notices it's way different from what he's used to. Louis tells him to take a closer look and says it's a map of the future Rumeliana, where Muzrak will finally be independent once his plans pan out. Later, Bayezid shows up and sees Balaban grinning at the map. Right then, Bayezid knows his brother's about to sell out. Not wanting to get screwed over, Bayezid secretly meets up with Zaganos and asks to be made a kulak of Muzrak. Zaganos grills him for a bit to figure out what Bayezid's really after, but eventually gives him the green light to take the role. By August 31st, year 75 of Torquier's calendar, Balaban and two other sultans gather their armies to surround Kuluch. Meanwhile, Orhan and his crew are getting ready for a siege and ask Mahmut for advice. Mahmut tells them to ditch the siege prep and try something else for a change. He shows them a message from the divan telling them to act as decoys and keep the three nations busy while Zaganos and the others swoop in and take out the rest of the towns. Mahmut's not about to let Kuluch's people be used as cannon fodder while Zaganos takes the glory. Even so, the enemy army outnumbers them 4-1. During their war meeting, Ismail and Bayezid show up, and Mahmut gets word from Suleiman about Ismail's hidden troops armed with shark yays. Mahmut realizes this fight might pit brothers against each other, and if that happens, they need to be on the winning side no matter what. Bayezid straight up tells him it's cool to kill his brother since he's over him anyway. Mahmut makes sure everyone's on the same page and then moves forward with the plan. When the time comes, they head to the front lines, ready to take the win. Balaban remembers the time he dealt with that idiot Saluja, whose dumb ideas nearly got him killed. Balaban thanks Saluja for the heads up that saved his life from Mahmut, but as payback for being so stupid, Balaban kills him on the spot. Snapping out of his thoughts, Balaban focuses on the battlefield. He sees how small Mahmut's numbers are and starts looking for his brother. When he spots Bayezid, Balaban decides that killing all of them with his 20,000 troops wouldn't feel right. So instead, he only takes 5,000 men to even the odds and charges into battle. Seeing Balaban's move, Mahmut thanks Bayezid for sticking with them to the end and tells Ismail to ride off and hide at the pre-planned spot. With that settled, Mahmut gets his men into formation and realizes Balaban is leading all 23,000 troops. If he wants to win the war, he's got to take down Balaban and make the rest of his army useless. So, he goes for this super basic battle plan, but Balaban figures it out pretty fast. Seeing how weak and simple the setup is, Balaban gets cocky, goes all in, and charges straight at Mahmut's army. Mahmut tries to throw him off by using tree branches on horses as a distraction, but Balaban doesn't fall for it. He keeps chasing Mahmut, thinking he's got the upper hand. Once Mahmut lures him in close enough, he tells his guys on horseback to kick up a ton of dust with the branches, creating a huge cloud that blinds Balaban and his troops for a bit. This works pretty well, and Balaban's forces start getting separated from the rest of their 18-0-strong army. Eventually, one of the cocky commanders from earlier splits off from the main group. The 18-0 men try to follow, but they get ambushed by spear-wielding soldiers hiding in the galleys. Orhan sees the dust cloud and realizes it's time to move to the next phase of the plan. He signals his guys, and they quickly form a reverse bow formation. Meanwhile, the rest of the Kuluch army pretends to retreat, giving Mahmut's troops enough time to catch up to Balaban's men and trap them from both sides. With the dust cloud still hanging around, Uzun asks Fatma if they should send reinforcements, but Fatma, knowing her brother's pride, decides not to insult him by interfering. Mahmut pushes through Balaban's Yanakaris, taking out most of them. By the time Balaban realizes he's screwed, it's too late. Over half of his prized Yanakaris are dead. When the dust finally settles, Mahmut confronts Balaban and tells him to surrender while he still has the chance, or he'll face death by Mahmut's sword. But Balaban, being as proud as ever, ignores him. Instead, He rallies the remaining Unikaris, firing them up to keep fighting for their country. This works, and they charge after the enemy. Kiros and a group of Kaluch soldiers retreat into some nearby ravines, leading Balaban and his men into a trap set by Ismail. Once Balaban's troops are deep enough in the ravine, Bayezid and Ismail get their Shark Ye weapons ready and fire on them. After the first attack, Ismail orders his men to block Balaban's escape routes by rolling massive boulders to seal the front and back of the ravine. With the exits blocked, the Shark Ye crew gets ready for another round of fire. Meanwhile, Ismail's men start shooting arrows at Balaban's army to keep them on edge. Balaban has his troops form a turtle shell formation to shield themselves from the arrows. As they move toward what they think is an exit, Balaban starts realizing how badly he underestimated Mahmut. Before he can come up with a new plan, Bayezid and his crew fire another round, wiping out most of Balaban's men. After surviving the second wave, Balaban spots the Shark Ye shells on the ground and figures out that Bayezid is behind the attack. He's shocked and hurt, thinking his brother hates him enough to betray him like this. He quickly orders his men to get out of the trap before Bayezid can fire again, but it's too late. Bayezid and his team unleash a third round of shots, this time hitting Balaban twice, once in the chest and, well, probably in the nuts. Even with those wounds, Balaban, being the absolute beast he is, charges at Bayezid and tries to kill him. He demands to know why Bayezid betrayed him. Bayezid tells him it's because he's not fit to be a sultan. He accuses Balaban of being too emotional and reckless, especially after getting too cozy with Louis, the backstabbing empire guy. Bayezid says he always knew it would come to this because Balaban is too stubborn and caught up in his feelings. Balaban drops his knife and asks Bayezid if he remembers when he promised to love him forever. Bayezid holds his dying brother and tells him he's loved him since they were kids. As the sun sets on August 31st, Balaban dies on the battlefield, leaving the title of sultan to his brother, Bayezid. Back on the battlefield, Uzun, the fat slob, gets fed up waiting for Balaban to give the green light before attacking with his army. So, he rounds up his troops and gets ready to wipe out the rest of Orhan's forces. Both Abariga and Orhan know what Uzun's planning, but they stay chill and wait for Mahmut to bring proof that Balaban's been taken out. If Mahmut can handle Balaban, the war's basically over. In the meantime, Abiriga tries to keep Orhan from losing his cool and doing something stupid, but it's tough for Orhan to stay calm since he's losing so many men with every attack. Just when things are looking grim, Princess Ecchi rides out of the castle with the castle's guards. Orhan watches her from a distance and realizes she's planning to fight Uzun's men with guards who aren't even trained for real combat. Ecchi doesn't care though, and throws the guards into the fight to buy Mahmut and Bayezid more time to finish their mission. The fat jerk Uzun catches on to Ecchi's plan and, pissed off at her gutsy move, sends his men after her. Orhan shouts out for his future wife, praying she'll be okay, when out of nowhere, Iskender shows up and saves her from getting killed. Soon after, Mahmut arrives with Balaban's head, proving he's dead. Uzun immediately backs off and runs like the coward he is. Dude's terrified because the only guy who gave him the guts to fight is gone now. Uzun's in deep trouble as he retreats to his castle to come up with a new plan with the Empire. Meanwhile, Fatma hears about how things have gone sideways and starts planning her escape before she gets caught. When night falls, Mahmut and his crew are pumped to see Uzun running away. Instead of chasing him, they let him and his men go back the way they came. Uzun, being clueless, has his ragtag mercenaries guide him through the ravines again, where Bayezid and Ismail, one of Uzun's sons, are waiting for him. The two lie in wait until Uzun and his beaten-down soldiers are deep in the ravines. Then they spring their trap. They scare the soldiers off with a Shark Ye, and the soldiers bolt, leaving Uzun behind. Before Ismail finishes the job, Bayezid asks if he's ready to kill his own father. Ismail says his dad's nothing but a cowardly, fat loser with no morals. Plus, if he kills his dad now and takes the throne, none of his siblings can challenge him for it. Once the coast is clear, Ismail climbs down and takes out his father faster than your dad's quickest nap. Somewhere else, Mahmut and his crew corner Fatma and her last group of fighters in another part of the ravines. After scaring the hell out of them, they mess up and end up handing their sultan over to Mahmut. He takes Fatma back to the castle and locks her up. Over dinner, Mahmut talks with his new squad about how to punish someone like her. They're worried that if they kill her in cold blood, the kid who's next in line for the throne might flip out and ruin their plans. Kiros asks the princess why Fatma brought the boy to see the war, and Ecchi explains it's because he's safer with his mom than left alone in the palace. Then she tells a story about how her mom, Sultan Fatma, became ruler after her dad died. Fatma was supposed to hold the throne until the boy was old enough to take over. Some family members, like her uncle Qasim, didn't like this, but Balaban quickly took him out before he could cause too much trouble. After hearing Ecchi's story, Orhan stands up and tries to defend Fatma, but Ecchi, Fatma's daughter, says they can't let that happen. After dinner, Mahmut goes back to Fatma and tells her she'll be executed at sunset with a painless poison. Fatma accepts her fate and asks if her son, Kemal, Kemal will be killed too. Surprisingly, Mahmut says no, since Kemal is supposed to inherit Balta's throne when he's old enough. In the meantime, Aishi will run things in Balta until Kemal turns 15 and can rule. Fatma feels a little better hearing this. Kemal, seeing his mom's face, rushes to Mahmut and begs him to show mercy and spare her, saying she hasn't done anything wrong. He even goes to Aishi and asks her to step in, but Aishi tells her spoiled little brother there's nothing she can do to change the decision. Kemal runs back to his mom and threatens to get revenge if they go through with the plan to kill her. At dawn, Mahmut gives Fatma a drink, and she takes a sip, thinking it'll be her last. But when the sun fully rises, Mahmut calls off the execution and decides to let her live. Ismail and Bayazit confront Mahmut about his decision, but he explains what's at stake. If Kemal loses his mom, he'll never forgive them, and all their efforts will be wasted. To keep Fatma safe, Mahmut promises to set her up in a house on the edge of the city where she can live out her days. At this moment, Suleiman steps up and asks Mahmut what he'll do if the divan doesn't approve. Mahmut straight up says he doesn't care what they think because this is his call, and he'll handle his new sultans however he wants. From that day on, a new legend was born. Later, Orhan throws a tantrum like a spoiled brat while saying goodbye to his fiancée, Aisha. She finally gets him to stop crying and tells him to toughen up so she can actually respect him enough to marry him. Orhan pulls himself together, and Aishi moves on with her day. Later that afternoon, word got out about the successful coup, and Zaganos, along with the other sore losers who were down to spill innocent blood to hold on to power, heard the news. The new sultans paid their respects as they rolled into the capital of Turkey. Meanwhile, Louis didn't see this as a problem, as long as the civil war didn't mess with the empire. He met up with the emperor and told him to get the troops ready so they could hit Turkey soon. On the flip side, Abiriga and Kiros were talking about getting Mahmut back as Pasha at the next divan meeting, since they figured he'd done enough good to earn it. At the next divan, Mahmut got a shout out from Buyuk himself, who later asked if he wanted his Pasha title back. Mahmut caught on quick that the Pashas were testing his loyalty to Turkey. Before answering, Mahmut thought back to a chat he had with Ismail, back when he was complaining about pointless bloodshed and all that. Ismail told him that soldiers die for a good cause, and whether Mahmut liked it or not, they'd be happy to see their dreams come true. The new sultans also promised to work non-stop to make Mahmut's dream a reality. With all that in mind, Mahmut accepted the title. Later that day at the divan, some guy was whining about losing 7,000 men in the civil war and freaking out about what to do if the empire attacked. Mahmut raised his hand and suggested hitting the empire first. Even Zaganos was caught off guard by that. Mahmut told everyone to believe in themselves and pointed out some stuff they had that the empire didn't, which even got Halil Pasha on board. Halil stood up and hyped Mahmut up, convincing everyone to make him the first minister of foreign affairs. That night, Mahmut and Zaganos had an awkward run-in in the castle courtyard. Mahmut called out to Zaganos and thanked him for picking him and Suleiman to be key players in his spy network. He tried to give the pyramids back, but Zaganos wouldn't take them. Instead, Zaganos told Mahmut to make everyone proud. Mahmut thanked him again and went back to his crew to keep doing what needed to be done. On their next trip, Mahmut and his crew head to a famous merchant city with ties to the east. There, he meets one of the city's top 3 merchants, Lord Ramanavram for short, to ask for his help in letting Turkiye Pashalu trade with the eastern part of the continent. Ram listens to Mahmut's pitch but shuts him down, saying they can't risk ruining their reputation with other nations just to help Turkey. After that, Ram kicks Mahmut out of his castle and goes about his day. On their way back to their place, Mahmut and his crew notice a commotion caused by a young girl named Hanayome Nikki after a trade deal went south. Apparently, she wanted her goods back because of some emotional attachment. Turns out, some dude named Idris ditched her dad's company to work for a rival right after her dad passed away, thinking Hanum wasn't cut out to run the business. Hanum loses it and tells Idris exactly how she feels. Idris, being a total jerk, fires back with some dumb comments, saying she's nothing compared to her dad, and blaming her dad for dying before she was ready to take over. That's all it takes to set Hanum off. As Idris turns to leave, she beats the crap out of him before one of his guards steps in to stop her. Idris gets up, talks more trash about her dad, and leaves Hanum standing there in tears. That night, Hanum wanders the streets with nowhere to go and no business to run. She's just roaming around like someone who's hit rock bottom. She cries and cries until she decides to give up completely. Just as she's about to toss her dad's necklace, Mahmut shows up with a new idea. Hanum gets a little aggressive, but Abariga calms her down. Mahmut shows her some beautiful Turkian jewelry and promises her a fresh start if she's willing to leave her useless city behind and join his crew. Without hesitation, Hanum agrees and listens to Mahmut's plan. He asks her to come along so they can get to work on their mission. The next day, Mahmut, Kiros, and Abiriga all dress up as women and team up with Hanum to sell their jewelry to the street vendors. Kiros is totally grossed out by his disguise, but Idris and the other jerks are stunned to see Hanum back on her feet just a day after hitting rock bottom. For Hanum, this marks a turning point, and she's determined not to go back to her old life. That night, Mahmoud asks Hanum if it's possible for them to break into the Eastern market like the city's top 3 merchants. Hanum says it'll be tough since those guys have made it hard for other merchants over the years. When Mahmoud explains that he wants to deal with Chinili because they're rich and easy for the Empire to notice, Hanum suddenly remembers a guy from Chinili who buys weird stuff from Rumeriana for the Chinili Emperor. The next day, Mahmoud and his crew, including Hanum, roll up to this guy's villa and find him chilling in his birthday suit. Hanum introduces the man as Wang Yixin from Chinili, and they all settle in the dining room to sip on some tea and chat. Mahmoud listens to Wang's backstory, trying to figure out what kind of dude he's dealing with. Once he's got the info he needs, Mahmoud pulls out a fancy Venetian glass cup and asks Wang if he can hook him up with 10,000 of these bad boys for Chinili. Wang hears him out but shuts it down, ready to end the meeting. Mahmoud stops him in his tracks, promising to bring peace to Chinili if Wang can deliver those glass cups. Seeing Mahmoud's determination, Wang changes his tune. He remembers the Chinili Emperor's son has a birthday coming up and counters with an offer to buy 400 boxes of Venetian glass from the Nikki caravan. They shake on it, and everyone goes their separate ways. That evening, Wang fills his wife in on why he made the deal while they're hanging out on the balcony. He tells her how aggressive the Baltrine Empire is and says he'd rather deal with a sharp guy like Mahmoud from Torquay than those jerks from the Empire. A few days later, Mahmoud and his crew get shipments of the Venetian glass and start loading them onto caravans for distribution. Ram asks Wang what's up with all the glass, and Wang explains it's for the prince's birthday. Ram grins and gives him the green light to keep at it, but then they hit a snag. Some cushioning materials they need don't show up on time. That night, they talk about the cushion problem, and Mahmoud tells them not to sweat it's already being handled. A few days later, Venedict ships out about 200 boxes of cushioning materials to the merchant cities. Brega oversees the operation, and Doge Lucio gives him a big thank you. To mess with the Empire's plans even more, Brega heads to Theros and offers to buy their wheat at 5 times the usual price. The greedy ruler of Theros jumps at the offer, ditching his deal with the Empire. Louis, one of the Empire's big shots, gets super annoyed that his plan got wrecked again. The Duchess rubs it in, calling him useless, but Louis doesn't care. Instead, he plans to jack the wheat from Theros by setting up a fleet in Foiniki to ambush the ships. The Empire's crew in Foiniki hears about the plan but drags their feet at first. Eventually, they get moving and attack the Venetian fleet from Theros. Brega tries to avoid a fight, and even the Empire's fleet captain isn't looking for trouble. But some hot-headed rookie decides to charge at the Venetian ships, kicking off a battle that lasts a few days. In the end, Venedict's navy wins and captures Ryan Law, an old, worn-out guy from Venedict. Mahmoud hears about all this and finally reveals his big plan for Venedict and the Empire. Since they've just become allies, Mahmoud speeds things up by getting Venedict to indirectly betray the Empire. Abiriga is blown away by Mahmoud's smarts and tells him so. Mahmoud thanks Hanum for her help in pulling it all together. Hanum accepts his thanks and asks to join his crew to travel the world with them. Mahmoud happily welcomes her aboard for their next adventure to stop the war. Around October 24th in the year 75 of the Torquian calendar, the Empire signed a deal with Venedict. The agreement was that Venedict would let the Empire sail through their waters with wheat they bought from Theros. But just 3 days after the deal, a couple of Empire ships carrying wheat to Foiniki got wrecked by pirates in Venedict's waters. Venedict didn't lift a finger to help and left the Empire hanging. Duchess Lele, who was on one of the attacked ships, was furious at Venedict's forces for doing nothing. On the other hand, Lucio, the Doge of Venedict, thought this was their way of kicking the Empire out because the Queen of Centro wasn't a fan of the Empire's pushy ways. Lucio figured out that Mahmoud had a hand in setting this all up. He realized Mahmoud had orchestrated the whole thing to make Venedict turn its back on the treaty. Both Brega and Lucio couldn't help but respect Mahmoud's guts and cleverness for pulling it off. Meanwhile, Mahmoud was seen shopping for fur coats at a small store, getting ready for the freezing cold up north. By November 7th, Mahmoud and his crew headed to the northern region, to a country called Regatul Urado. This place had been closed off from the world for 400 years, with no trade or contact with outsiders. After braving the harsh winter, they finally reached the gates, where they were thoroughly checked before being allowed in. Mahmoud noticed how rough the guards were with the locals, and how strict the checks were before they could enter the inner parts of the country. Even then, Mahmoud had to wait in a quiet spot while his meeting with a minister was being confirmed. After another round of checks, Mahmoud and his crew finally met Margit, the Minister of Diplomatic Affairs to Torquay. Margit, a stylish and sharp woman, showed them around the nation and introduced herself as the kulak of the country. She assured them that the king knew about her position, so they didn't need to worry. They talked about the Empire's earlier meeting that year. Later, they stopped by the training grounds of the Lance Cavalry and watched the soldiers practice and mess around. Kiros asked Margit how her country made iron goods if they were so self-sufficient. Margit explained how they managed, mentioning their large supply of iron ore. Suddenly, Mahmoud Mahmut spotted a northern goshawk flying overhead. Margit recognized it as her dad's pet eagle and rushed to greet him as he arrived on horseback. But her dad, King Zygmunt of Urido, scolded her for being too hasty. The king introduced himself to the group and challenged Mahmut to an eagle-bearer contest. Mahmut took him up on it and impressed the king with Iskender's skills. After their match, Mahmut starts thinking about a future where Torquay teams up with the country and realizes how awesome it'd be for them, since it'd mess up the empire's plans to invade. Zygmunt respects the challenge and heads out. Before he goes too far, he tells Mahmut he's not giving in to any of his demands because his country takes pride in surviving on its own. Mahmut keeps quiet and continues the night tour with the princess of the nation. Margit shows them the fishermen coming back and gives them a moment to soak in how stunning the view is. Not long after, they catch a whiff of the nasty smell of fermented crap coming from the cliffs west of where they are. She mentions that the smell keeps most people, including those from the empire, away. As they move further from the village, they spot a villager wandering out into the snowy wilderness. Luckily, they manage to bring him back to his family. Mahmut notices the sad look on Margit's face and realizes something is seriously off in this city. At dinner, Zygmunt spills the truth about why the man wanted to end it all. Turns out, there's a famine tearing through their land, and since they're dirt poor, the older folks sometimes walk out into the wilderness to die, so there's more food for everyone else. Hanayome loses it and calls out the king for eating while his people are starving to death. The king goes on some rant about how his grandpa and great-grandpa died the same way, saying he might go out like that too. Mahmut cuts in, telling the guy to start trading with other countries to survive, but the king refuses, saying he won't risk breaking 400 years of tradition and ending up like Foinike. Meanwhile, in the background, another blonde girl is eavesdropping on their dinner talk. Zygmunt keeps running his mouth until dinner's over, and they all head to bed. Once everyone's gone, Zygmunt decides to team up with the Empire the next day, with his other daughter, the blonde girl from Erler, pushing him to go for it. Meanwhile, Mahmut and the crew are struggling to sleep in their rooms because the stink from the western cliffs is unbearable. Abiriga suddenly recognizes the smell as Sturko from Centro's Sud Island. If they can get permission to check out the cliffs, they might find something interesting. They quickly get the minister's approval and head to the cliffs. There, they're hit by the smell of seabird poop mixed with sand. Margit explains the history behind the droppings, and Abiriga explains that Sturko is basically fossilized bird crap. Abiriga knows the value of the droppings and sends a sample to Zaganos to get it tested. Zaganos and Suleiman test it by mixing the Sturko in some liquid and comparing it to a control sample. Turns out, the stuff from the snowy country is way better than what they're used to. They hit up Mahmut and his crew up north to let them know they've hit the jackpot. When the test results come back, Zygmunt's guards show up and haul them to the throne room for an emergency meeting. There, Mahmut and his squad meet Zygmunt, his two daughters, and some illegitimate dude from the Empire. The meeting kicks off, and Zygmunt agrees to the Empire's alliance. The Empire's envoy starts talking a big game, promising Zygmunt the world if they play along. But Mahmut figures the guy wants to hear his take, so he throws caution to the wind and speaks up. He tells the king about the high-quality Sterco they found. Abiriga jumps in, explaining how the Sterco is super valuable and could make Urado rich for a long time. He says if they team up with Torquia Pashalu, Mahmut will personally make sure the deal happens. The Empire tries to mess up Torquia's plans, but Margit, one of Zygmunt's daughters, steps in and tells her clueless dad that the Empire will just trap Urado in debt. She warns that if they ally with the Empire, there's no way out. Meanwhile, her sister Gertrude sides with the Empire, saying it's smarter to roll with the stronger team. The envoy keeps spewing nonsense until Mahmut cuts him off, breaking down the Empire's true colors. After hearing Mahmut out, Zygmunt finally sees what's up and makes his choice. To seal the deal, he takes the envoy to the execution grounds and officially teams up with Torquier Pashalu. Meanwhile, Louis and the other big shots of the Empire were chilling with the Emperor, who wasn't really on board with Louis's recent pushy moves to grab more land for the Empire. Louis laid out some solid proof that Centro couldn't handle their own business, and that made them easy to take down. But some other guys, like this short dude with wacky hair in a wheelchair, didn't agree. He thought the Empire shouldn't waste any more soldiers or resources on pointless wars. He figured they were doing just fine and didn't need to fight anyone to survive. For once, the pacifists made a good point. The guy started arguing with Louis about it, but Louis shot back, telling the Emperor that fighting and being aggressive were the only ways to deal with problems. Corentin Pino, the general of the Balt-Rhine Land Army, also jumped in, saying he wasn't siding with Louis either. Louis called them out, saying they were just full of crap and jealous because he was smarter than them. He brushed off their failure to take the snowy city, saying it wasn't a big deal and they shouldn't let it stop them. Then he kept running his mouth until it was time for the Emperor to make a call. In the end, the Emperor, who's just as shady as Louis, asked to hear Louis's next plan. Meanwhile, Mahmut and his crew were still in Urado, talking about how messed up it was that Zygmunt had their envoy executed. Right then, the king rolled in and doubled down on his alliance with Torquay. Mahmut got nervous and asked if the Empire might come after them for killing their envoy, but Zygmunt didn't care at all about about what the Empire thought. After clearing that up, Mahmut started explaining how the Sturko goods would be shipped out to the countries that needed them. He checked in with Hanum to make sure she was ready to handle such a big, ongoing operation. Hanum, being a natural-born merchant, told him not to sweat it. Mahmut then asked the Emperor for permission to head back to Torquay the next day. Just then, Margit showed up and introduced herself as Hanum's travel buddy. Hanum wasn't thrilled but went along with it before moving on. The next day, they all hit the road for their long trip back to Torquay. On the way, Abiriga gave Mahmut props for getting Venedik to turn against the Empire, along with some other states. What they didn't know was that trouble was brewing in Venedik while they were traveling. After their clash with the Empire, Venedik and some other countries secretly agreed to ignore pirates attacking the Imperial fleet. But one country, the Republic of Lisalani, decided to break the deal and went to help the Imperial fleet instead. Turns out, Lisalani had its own sneaky plans. When Lucio caught wind of this, he sent Brega to Lisalani to figure out what the shady dude Doria was up to. Brega quickly set sail for Lisalani and confronted Doria, calling him out for being a slimy jerk. Doria, of course, denied everything, saying his country's actions weren't always under his control. But the sneaky guy promised to look into it while they enjoyed their time in his city. After meeting with the dog, Brega and his crew head down some stairs, debating whether they should trust that dog or not. Right then, they stumble on a bunch of actors freaking out over Paolo, who's super sick and apparently brought some new plague to town on a ship from the west. Brega and his buddy take note of the situation and immediately report it to Lucio. Meanwhile, Doria sneaks off to meet with some Empire agents who pat him on the back for pulling off a killer act that totally tricked Brega and his partner into thinking he was legit. Doria's got big plans soon. Venedik will be toast, and his family will take over the Centro. The Empire guys are hyped about how sharp this dude is and make sure he knows it. Brega, though, decides to park his ship somewhere safe until the plague chills out. When they get back to Venedik, Lucio decides to play it safe and halts sea travel for now to keep the plague from spreading to Venedik just in case Doria wasn't lying. Either way, they're gearing up for whatever happens so they don't get blindsided. Meanwhile, Mahmut heads home to Torquay and finds Lucio just chilling on his couch, smoking a hookah. Mahmut's like, "What are you doing here?" Turns out Lucio's there to check out the next divan and scope out Torquay himself. If the alliance works out, Berlik Torquay, Regatul Urado, and the Republic of Venedik can finally team up and get other countries to help them take on the Empire. Mahmut welcomes Lucio to Torquay and hopes he has a good time. The next day, the leaders of the three nations meet up for another divan. Orhan spots his girl Ecchi again and can't help but gush over her. Once the divan kicks off, Lucio gives a speech asking for an alliance with the other two nations. Buyuk Pasha's cool with it, but Zygmunt's got trust issues. Dude doesn't trust Lucio at all, thinking he'll bail on the alliance the first chance he gets. Lucio claps back, reminding Zygmunt that he's not squeaky clean either. He broke some ancient 400-year-old law in his own capital recently. After hearing all this, Zygmunt calls on Mahmut, his right-hand man, to speak for him. Mahmut steps up and backs Lucio, telling everyone to think about the fact that Lucio showed up in person for the divan. That's gotta mean something, right? As the meeting goes on, Buyu gets word from Zaganos that a huge fleet from the Empire and Lisalani has blocked off Phoiniki and Theros. If they don't break the blockade, the whole western Centro region will fall to the Empire. Hearing this, Aishi interrupts the meeting to show the Pashas what could happen if the two strongest nations fall to the Empire. That's when Lucio realizes he's been playing right into Louis' plan the whole time. Taking the plague seriously and stopping all shipping in Venedik was a huge mistake, and now he's paying for it. Zygmunt, inspired by Lucio's words, finally agrees to sign the alliance. Once that's done, Zaganos and Halil Pasha jump straight into planning how to move their land army to the best spot for the fight. Halil Pasha thinks the Republic of Fiore won't just let them pass through since they see Torquians as uncivilized. If they're not careful, they might end up fighting Fiore instead. Bayezid suggests recruiting people along the way as they travel through the plains, and everyone agrees it's a solid plan. Meanwhile, Lucio plans to head back to Venedik to unite the smaller Centro nations, thinking they might side with the Empire. Once he's got them all on board, they'll head west by sea. In the next scene, Lucio suits up in some super tight armor, while Bayezid gets a personal caravan ready for him. Zaganos and Suleiman have one last talk about calming any unrest in Fiore and other nations before the main Torquay forces show up. Mahmut and his crew travel with Suleiman to the southern nations to negotiate opening their gates before the main army arrives. At the same time, Buyuk and Zygmunt talk about how to spread out their army to help with the war. Buyuk asks Zaganos to lead the main forces, but Zaganos turns it down, saying his skills are better used elsewhere. Halil steps up and takes the job, reminding everyone that he's experienced and won't make dumb rookie mistakes like some overconfident fools. Meanwhile, Louis keeps scheming to create his perfect world. Near the Dux Regionis Ovest, the moon turns red, signaling the arrival of the Imperial imperial fleet. In just one night, the entire fortress of Ovis Dux Regionis falls to the Empire, marking the start of the Great Rumeriana War. After taking over Ovis, Pino moved on to Dux Regionis Scoglio and told the leader there, Dux Regulus, to give up. When Regulus saw how massive the imperial army was, he had no choice but to surrender. Meanwhile, Mahmut and his crew were riding hard to Cor di Rumeriana, a region made up of 34 city-states, each smaller than the other but all super proud of themselves. Their first stop was the Republic of Arno, which was so tiny that even Mahmut was surprised. They found a crowd of people complaining and protesting. Out of nowhere, this skinny guy ran up to the palace gates, grabbed a few bags of gold, and went back to his group. On his way, he noticed Mahmut was a Torkian and that his crew was from different places. He gave them a quick thanks for stopping by and went back to doing his thing. Suleiman explained that the guy and his group were mercenaries from Taro, a city full of people called the El Toro. These guys were in Arno to make money and were usually pretty shady. Since none of the cities in the region had strong armies, it made sense that people like them were around. Inside the castle, Gonfalonier Giulio was complaining about how the El Toro mercenaries did a crappy job even though he paid them a ton of money. He eventually calmed down when Suleiman and his crew showed up to talk. Once they had his attention, Mahmud explained the recent blockade between Phoenike and Theros, hoping Giulio would understand his point. Giulio already knew about the blockade and even the Urato-Torki alliance. Mahmud asked Giulio to let his Torkian army pass through the city. Giulio got pissed, saying it wasn't his call to make. If they wanted that to happen, they'd need permission from Fiore, the center of Corti Rumeriana. If they didn't follow Fiore's rules, they'd be outcast. Mahmud and his crew took a break from the sweaty, frustrated Giulio and talked about how much hate they were getting as Torkians in Corti Rumeriana. Suleiman pointed out that these people were too cozy with their peaceful lives to see what the Empire was really up to. Determined to get their message across, Mahmud and his team headed to Fiore as fast as they could. Meanwhile, Giacomo and his two clueless friends were sitting in a pub in Fiore, drinking and complaining about the war that was about to hit. The Empire had not only blockaded the Central War, but also made life tough for other cities. Fiore was stuck in the middle, whether they liked it or not, and didn't have enough soldiers to fight back. Mahmud and his crew arrived in Fiore the next morning, dressed up to meet the Gonfalonier. On their way, Suleiman reminded them to keep things short and to the point since the Gonfalonier didn't have much time. Mahmut carefully planned what he was going to say and led the group inside. When they got into the castle, Mahmut was blown away by how stunning the art gallery was. Suleiman warned him not to let the idiots in the castle get under his skin since they'd probably try to provoke him. When they finally get to the Gonfalonier's room, they find Katerina herself just hanging out, waiting for them. Katerina greets her old flame, Suleiman, before moving on to meet Mahmut, who's totally caught off guard but manages to greet her politely, along with the others. Katerina seems to vibe with Mahmut and helps him feel at ease. Not long after, they get down to business. Katerina starts off by killing some time, mentioning that she's aware of the Empire's blockade. Mahmut, meanwhile, keeps losing focus as Katerina casually makes tea. She tells them about an emergency assembly of the Cuore di Rumeriana happening the next day, and does something totally unexpected that throws Mahmut off. He catches her messing with Suleiman's feet under the table when he reaches for his hat. By the time it's Mahmut's turn to share his thoughts, the timer goes off, marking 30 minutes, and it's too late. Later, Mahmut and his crew chill at a nearby pub, venting about how Katerina totally threw them off their game. Abiriga, the only one thinking straight, points out that Katerina never actually planned to negotiate with them. The big question is, why did she meet with them that day instead of waiting for the assembly the next day? They toss around some ideas, but nothing really sticks. Meanwhile, Giacomo and his crew hear about Katerina's meeting with the Torkians. Giacomo stays quiet while the other old dudes trash-talk Katerina for possibly teaming up with Torkie. After mulling it over, Giacomo finally snaps and drops an F-bomb, suggesting they side with the Empire instead. A few dozen miles away, in Scoglio, a city in the Dux region, the local kulak is on the run from a Rodorm guard who caught him sneaking around. The kulak leads the guy to a quiet spot, takes him out, and gets ready to send a message to Suleiman ASAP. But before he can, he overhears General Pino giving a speech, claiming the Empire's right to take over Phoenician land. Hearing this, the kulak realizes things are really bad. Just then, another guard catches him slipping and calls for backup. The kulak rushes to send messages to Fiore, Cielo, Arno, Altu, and another nation to the east. Right after sending them, Eleanor shows up and kills him. Back in Fiore, Suleiman tries to figure out what Katerina's deal is, but no one's willing to spill the tea on her. That night, Giacomo and his crew show up with a bunch of signatures from regular folks demanding that Katerina never side with Torkie. They start grilling her, asking whose side she's on, and reminding her how badly Torkie has treated them in the past. They tell her not to forget history and to tread carefully moving forward. After hearing them out, Katerina tells them she's not Team Torkie, at least not yet. She thanks them for stopping by and shows them the door. Once they're gone, she places Suleiman's portrait on the wall, calls him her lover, and apologizes for betraying his trust. The next day, a guard delivers the kulak's message from Skoglio to Suleiman. After seeing everything the Empire has done to Foiniki and Skoglio, Suleiman decides to stop playing nice with the peace-loving folks of Fiore. In the next scene, Suleiman storms into the assembly hall, cutting off their meeting to share the news from Skoglio. Katerina and her crew tell Suleiman they're planning to form a third neutral power in Rumeriana to stay out of the Torquay-Balt-Rhine war. Mahmud is completely stunned. After hearing the crap Katerina just spouted, Suleiman and Mahmud are totally stunned. Katerina brushes off their shock and keeps rambling about how she got a bunch of signatures from people saying she can't let the Torquian army pass through Fiore. She's talking so much nonsense that Suleiman grabs the agreement letter on her table and burns it to ashes. After pulling that bold move, he hands Katerina a bloodstained letter that a Torquian messenger risked his life to deliver. While she's processing that, Abiriga and Kiros lock the door to keep the guards out and buy some time. Suleiman explains what went down between the Empire and Skoglio 3 days ago, while Mahmud breaks down how Foinike's stubbornness led to their downfall. He tells them there's still a chance to fix things, but some of the older politicians grill Mahmud to confirm if the letter's legit. Mahmud assures them that Suleiman isn't the kind of guy who'd lie, especially to the Gonfaloniere. When the guards finally show up, Katerina has Suleiman and his crew arrested and postpones the meeting to figure out other options for Fiore and the Cuore di Rumeriana to survive the crisis. While locked up, Giacomo and his lackeys won't stop whining about Katerina, even considering working with Torquier. But soon enough, they get confirmation that Suleiman's been telling the truth all along. Katerina calls Mahmud and his group back to her quarters and officially decides to side with the Torquian Tripartite Alliance. Mahmud thanks her for understanding, and Katerina wishes them luck while she looks into ways to keep her region safe. Mahmud thanks her again and promises to send a messenger pigeon to Halil and the Torquian forces so they can start moving through the Cuore di Rumeriana. With their business in Fiore wrapped up, the group plans to head to South Rumeriana, specifically Toro, for more negotiations. Suleiman, though, decides to stick around a little longer before catching up with them. When Giacomo and his crew hear about Katerina's decision, they're furious and decide to take matters into their own hands. Since Katerina's quarters are always heavily guarded, they use a hidden passageway belonging to the Rossi family to sneak in. Dressed like criminals, they make it to her quarters and confront her, demanding she reconsider letting Torquier pass through their lands. Katerina listens but tells them staying neutral would mean losing everything. As the Gonfaloniere of Fiore, she won't back down. At this point, the angry old men are done with her. They shove Giacomo aside and hold Katerina at knife point. Just when they're about to stab her, Suleiman pops out of the vents and saves her. After dealing with the situation, Suleiman explains things to Giacomo, assuring him that Fiore is in good hands. The next day, Kiros and Mahmud talk about a shady group of mercenaries they found and connect them to the next city they're heading to. While traveling, they stumble upon a spring bath and find some orange-haired idiot bathing there. The guy starts trash-talking Mahmud until he realizes he's a Pasha. He introduces himself as Urbach or something and promises to lead them to the mayor twins of Taro. Mahmud and his group follow him, and meanwhile, the Kulak of Campana, Blanca, secretly watches as the Empire's army marches through a ravine. In the meantime, Halil Pasha hears the good news from Mahmud. He quickly gets his men ready to march to the next city, Fiore, so they can keep moving toward Pino. Meanwhile, Mahmud and his crew make it to Toro safe and sound, where they meet the two twin mayors who are kind of a pain. The twins don't think much of Mahmud as a leader, so they give him a little test to see if he's worth their respect. The test? Mahmud has to use 400 mercenaries to take the castle gate they'll be defending. If he can snatch the feather from the first mayor's hat, he wins. In the next scene, Mahmud gets the 400 mercenaries to start the challenge. Back in Venedig, Lucio Doge is gearing up his nation for war. He orders round-the-clock shifts at the shipyards and calls for Brega's fleet to head back to Venedig. Zaganos finds out where the Empire is located and realizes there's no turning back now. Mahmud and his team pass the mayor's test, and Ecchi explains their military strategy to Kamal. She warns him that the Empire is super dangerous and that he has to be just as sharp as they are. Over in another country, Bayezid is also getting ready for war, and Ismail, the Sultan of Buchak, arms his troops to make sure they're ready to fight. Later that day, Mahmud and his people finish the test and earn the trust of the Toro brothers. Wang chimes in about the upcoming battle, while Hanum and Margit complain about the constant war and chaos caused by the Empire. Hanum reassures her that Mahmud is there to make things better, so they don't need to stress about the war. After winning the test, Mahmud gets Taro's approval to let Torquier's army pass through. That night, Pino and his gang burn Campana to the ground. As the city goes up in flames, one of the young engineers watches his master and everyone he cares about perish. The engineer, Vascauhoz, a bit of a clueless kid, grabs the secret plans for some machine, hides inside the city's giant bell, and rolls himself down the hill into a group of Empire soldiers. He passes out for a bit and almost gets killed by some guards, but Blanca shows up just in time to take out the guards and save Vasco. She rides off with him to the Allied camp while the city burns behind them. Meanwhile, Mahmoud is hanging out with the Toro mercenaries, eating, drinking, and chatting with the twins. He quickly figures out that money talks with these guys. Wasting no time, Mahmoud uses Torquier's cash to put a down payment on 500 mercenaries, promising to pay the rest later. The twins agree to the deal and start getting things ready. Then, out of nowhere, the annoying guy from the Hot Springs Urbach, or whatever his name is, shows up and inserts himself into Mahmoud's group as a new member. Apparently, he wants to see where Mahmoud's journey will take him. A few thousand miles away, Louis is staring at a chess piece, upset, thinking it represents Torquier's last shot at winning. If his plans go smoothly, he won't have to worry about that kind of power being unleashed. Mahmoud and his team soon gain Espada's support and immediately start heading to Cielo. Just then, a messenger reports that the Empire has taken over Campana. Hearing this, Mahmoud realizes they're running out of time. For now, he's focused on getting to Cielo and securing their alliance before the Empire does. On their way to a safe place, Blanca and Vasco run into a bunch of refugees wandering through the mountains, looking for somewhere to call home. After chatting with a few of them, she figures out they're deserters from Center and some smaller cities that gave up to the Empire's army. She asks where they're headed, and they say they're trying to get to Cielo. Meanwhile, Mahmoud and his crew are climbing these crazy mountain trails to reach Cielo and meet with the Fiore director to talk business. Abiriga gives them a quick rundown of Cielo's history as a refuge for prisoners of war and stragglers. To keep things organized, Cielo's leaders are called directors. Over time, things have been chill there, with folks keeping their heads down and staying humble. Later, Mahmoud and his group end up at a theater where the director of Cielo is putting on a play about their version of heaven and earth. Urbach explains the whole idea to Mahmoud, who honestly doesn't seem impressed and didn't even realize the guy on stage was the director. Urbach breaks down the concept of Cielo's key to Mahmoud and waits for the director to finish the play. When Carbajal, aka the director, finally wraps up, he talks about giving the bad guys a shot at redemption as long as they're forgiven. Some folks aren't happy about this and call him out for changing the script, but Carbajal couldn't care less. While he keeps rambling about good and evil, his assistant shows up and reminds him about the meeting with his guests. Carbajal steps off the stage and heads to his office. Before he leaves, Mahmoud asks if he's really the one in charge of Cielo. Carbajal realizes Mahmoud is a guest and invites him to hang out in his quarters. As they hike up the mountain to get there, Carbajal and his assistant explain how Cielo gets its funding from rich donors who have more money than they know what to do with. They also talk about how Cielo is blessed with lush fields and thriving ports for farming and fishing. Thanks to these donors, the people of Cielo have been living well for over 1,000 years. After more walking and talking, they finally reach the assembly hall. Outside, there's a massive crowd of refugees, about 30,000 waiting at Cielo's gates, hoping to get help for their sick and find shelter. Carbajal tells Cassandra, his partner, to let them in immediately so they can start helping them out. Urbach and Kiros warn that this might piss off the Empire, but Carbajal doesn't care. He believes leaving people to starve and suffer goes against what Cielo stands for. Whether or not the Empire gets mad, they're not about to lose sleep over it. If anyone tries to mess with them, they'll deal with it. Mahmoud takes this chance to ask Carbajal to join their alliance against the Empire. Carbajal listens to everything Mahmoud has to say and agrees to help out. 13 days later, Pino and his right-hand woman are planning their next move against Halil Pasha and his army. She tells him Halil is chilling in Taro right now, so if they want to win, they've got to act fast. Meanwhile, Halil Pasha is kicking back and enjoying some sweet massages from the twin mayor's ladies. After the massage, they chat about the latest updates on his march through the Cuore Rumeriana. The mayors promise to make his journey through their land worthwhile. Halil thanks them for their support and lays out the Torquian army's plans. Right then, Blanca and Vasco show up from Campana to meet Halil. Halil welcomes them and listens to their pitch. Vasco, a foundry worker from Campana, asks Halil for a big favor. He shows Halil the blueprints for a massive shark Ye he's been designing, hoping Halil will back him in building it to fight the Empire's army. But Halil shoots him down, saying it's just not doable right now. Vasco tries to change his mind, but Halil's already decided. To keep the plans from falling into enemy hands, Halil burns them and tells Vasco to let it go. At that moment, a Torquian soldier shows up to report that the Imperial forces are marching toward Cielo. Halil quickly excuses himself, hops on his horse, and heads out with his army, aiming to reach Cielo before the Empire. Vasco, however, pulls out a copy of his blueprints and starts working on his project anyway. Back in Cielo, Carbajal and Cassandra figure out the Empire's next target. Mahmoud and his crew also learn about the Empire's plans and realize the enemy has a solid strategy. They start evacuating their people to get ready for the incoming war. Mahmoud's group starts to lose hope, but Carbajal reassures them by pointing out Cielo's Kajia trap designed to wipe out any enemies foolish enough to step into it. For now, they've got nothing to worry about. The next day, the Torquian army arrives, and Mahmoud rushes out to greet Halil Pasha. After exchanging pleasantries, Halil decides to set up camp outside the city. Meanwhile, a few dozen miles away, two Imperial commanders, Frenson and Adam, are enjoying some Cielo spring apples when suddenly, the bridge connecting two mountains collapses. They immediately realize this is Cielo's doing and decide to head back to Fondo to restock on supplies. The following day, Carbajal and Mamut estimate the Imperial forces to be about 67,000 strong. Soon after, the Imperial army shows up and starts chatting about Cielo's nice wooden houses and how they were built. Adam reminds Pilo that Cielo has refused to surrender, and with their supply lines cut, the Empire's forces are the ones in trouble. A female officer reminds Adam about their 12th army, led by Crystal Balls, and says they're counting on them to deliver food and supplies. Balls promises to get the supplies to them on time. Meanwhile, Mamut and Carbajal prepare for the siege. Around nighttime, Balls and his crew spot the Cielo militia hanging around, ready to jack the Empire's supplies. They immediately get into battle mode, trying their best to hold off Cielo's gang. But since Mamut was running the show on the other side, they didn't stand much of a chance. After taking out the fighters, Mamut and his squad torch the Empire's supplies before dipping. Pino and his team spot the flames, but stay chill. Balls and his army notice the Haubia gate opening, so they rush in, hoping to get inside the city and hit Cielo from the inside. Once the 12th Division rolls through Haubia, Pino and his crew head for the gates too. The Torquian army sees everyone heading in and waves them off like, good luck with that. After two army groups make it through the gates, the Empire's army suddenly stops because Frenzel gets a bad vibe about the gates. He figures there's a trap waiting for them in the city, and knows it'd be dumb to walk right into it. When Balls sees the 1st Division stop, he starts freaking out a bit too, but his commander, nicknamed Four Eyes, pushes him to keep going, so he does. Once they're deep in the city, Cielo's gang dumps oil all over the wooden parts of the place and sets it on fire. Unfortunately for them, only about 10,000 of Balls' men fall for the trap. The real heavy hitters are still outside, ready to go. After seeing what Cielo's plan was, Pino puts 20,000 men at the back and moves the rest to form a blockade with the troops he's got left. Back at the Empire, Louis is giving his assistant, Niccolo, a rundown on how iron gets turned into useful stuff while they're watching a fight in the arena between Glalat and some random dude. Once Niccolo gives a decent answer, Louis keeps explaining as Glalat finally wins the match. When Glalat grabs his prize money, Louis breaks down how important the Rodorm people are to the Empire's weapons game, so Niccolo gets the picture. Meanwhile, after checking out Cielo's secret weapon, Frenzel tells Pino and the crew to chill and keep an eye out for whatever the director might pull next. Carbajal, on the other hand, is hanging back, waiting for the general and his squad to roll through the gates. After waiting a while, he shuts the gates and moves on to plan the next attack. The next day, Carbajal says sorry to Mamut for not taking out more Imperial soldiers in the last fight. Mamut tells him it's all good and promises his efforts won't be forgotten. Back at their camp, Pino and his subgenerals decide to switch up their strategy. Pino orders 22 soldiers who didn't fight in the first siege to roll with him to Torquier's camp, so they can take down whoever's there and snag their supplies. After calling the generals to action, Pino leaves Frenzel in charge of the camp while he's gone. Later, Frenzel and Adam wonder why the military engineers are even involved in this fight. They figure it's part of the lady strategist's plan to take down Torquay faster. Frenzel glares at her, clearly not a fan. By noon, Carbajal, Mamut, and the others notice part of the Imperial army heading toward Torquier's camp. They talk about the odds, and from what Mamut can see, it's pretty clear Torquier's got the upper hand. When Halil Pasha hears about the Empire's forces, he packs up and bails. 8 days later, Pino and his troops reach Torquier's last campsite, only to find scraps of what was left behind. It doesn't take long for them to figure out Halil Pasha is trying to dodge a fight by keeping a 2-day gap between them. 3 days after that, Halil Pasha gets word about a river they can cross on their way out of the Empire's reach. He starts planning to cross it, thinking it's a solid move. What he doesn't know is that the Imperial soldiers are sharp as hell. They whip up some rafts out of logs and close the 2-day gap in just a few hours by floating down the river. Meanwhile, Halil and his crew are taking it easy until they run smack into their worst nightmare of the Empire. The Imperial soldiers are not only ready with their formations, but also have their weapons prepped for a bloody fight. Adam can't help but admire the lady strategist, even though she looks like a total bimbo. As for Halil Pasha, he knows there's no way out but to start the battle and get it over with. He sets up an old, predictable formation and sends about 8 men to lead the charge, so the setup is complete. When the battle horn blows, Halil's horse archers charge at Pino and start firing arrows at the Imperial soldiers. Luckily for the Empire, their shields are solid, so they block the attack without much trouble. Halil keeps pushing, letting his horse archers get wiped out by Pino's second lance-based strategy. Once Halil realizes how tough the front lines are, he pulls back the lancers and sends in the next wave with the horse archers. Pino sets up the same shield formation again. As his men block the second wave of arrows, Pino notices it's the same same tactic Halil used 14 years ago when they faced off. This time though, the cliffs behind the Imperial soldiers seem to have their backs covered, so Pino thinks he's good. But out of nowhere, 8,000 soldiers manage to climb the rocks behind them and sneak up on the Imperial troops. Halil and his guys charge toward the Imperial army, trying to trap them. Just when they think they've got it in the bag, Pino opens up his formation, lures Halil's division inside, and flips the script by surrounding them instead. The 8,000 soldiers rush the Imperial army to finish them off, but they're hit with massive cannons set up by the Imperial engineers. As soon as they get close, the engineers fire, wiping out the rear attack. Within minutes, the trap is fully sprung, and Halil is totally screwed. A few Imperial commanders praise the engineers for their smart thinking as the second wave of attackers tries to advance. The Imperial soldiers fire another round of cannonballs, smashing into the 2nd Division and throwing them off course. Adam, one of the Imperial officers, waits patiently for his commander's next move, showing his respect. Meanwhile, Halil desperately tries to break out of the trap, sending his troops to attack the front lines. But it's no use, it's already too late. Adam and another dude with a mustache give props to Lady Kokoschka for coming up with such a killer strategy. Lady Coco thanks them but gives all the credit to Louis for crafting such a genius plan. While all this chaos is going down, Louis is busy tweaking his plans and explaining what inspired the creation of the devastating cannons. As the battle rages, Abbas, Halil's right-hand man, is killed. In a last-ditch effort, Halil charges at Pino, but before he gets close, he's stopped and stabbed multiple times by enemy lancers. Pino finishes him off by beheading him with his sword. A few days later, Mahmut and the others see Halil Pasha's head mounted on a stake as the Imperial army marches back to Cielo with Torkian prisoners of war in tow. Word of the Empire's betrayal reaches Torkia Pashalu quickly, and a council meeting is called to figure out how to respond to such a brutal act. After hearing about all the awful things the Empire did to the Torkian soldiers, some people are ready to get revenge, but Zaganos tells them to use their heads instead of their emotions for a second. He sees this as a chance to make their smartest move. When someone argues about avenging Halil's death, Zaganos lays out the cold truth about why Halil lost. While the Empire was building up its military, Halil was busy making peace deals and got complacent. That's why he died. Zaganos even uses himself as an example, saying he'll be the one to crush Balt Rhine. Suleiman takes a moment to mourn Halil Pasha, who was a key figure in his life. After reading Halil's final message, Suleiman reflects on some inspiring words to honor him. Meanwhile, Mahmut remembers all the important moments he shared with Halil Pasha. Once he's done grieving, he toughens up, wipes away his tears, and admits he's been useless so far. He gets a pep talk from Halil's ghost, anime style, which fires him up. In their own ways, Zaganos, Suleiman, and Mahmut all pay their respects to Halil Pasha. After Mahmut finishes crying, he pulls himself together and vows to make the Empire pay big time. After snagging the Torkian army's supplies, the Empire decides to play the long game with a war of attrition against the Cielo forces. Both sides end up stuck in a stalemate. Worried their supplies might run dry, Mahmut asks Venedict for backup. Doge Lucio wastes no time and sails out with his fleet, aiming to break the blockade between Phoenike and Theros, which is held by the Republic of Lisolani's Boccanegra Armada on the Empire's orders. After days of fighting, Venedict's fleet finally smashes through and takes out the captain in charge of the blockade. After dealing with the clueless captain, Lucio has a chat with Doria to smooth things over and make sure there's no bad blood. They shake on it and agree to keep beating the Empire at sea while laying low until a new Centro leader is chosen. Lucio grins and tells Doria that he's not letting that happen. By May 18th, the Empire loses its grip on the Centro, thanks to Venedict. But as Venedict's fleet sails through rough seas, a month-long storm delays them from reaching Cielo in time. This messes things up big time for Cielo, which struggles to hold its own against the Empire. When the storm finally clears, Kiros breathes a sigh of relief, hoping for good news from Mahmut Pasha. Turns out, Mahmut had used the storm as cover to meet up with his allies. But now that the storm's over, Carbajal faces a new headache with his people. The endless rain has trashed their food supplies, and the refugees they took in are getting sicker. Since Venedict's fleet didn't show up on time, the people start thinking they've been betrayed, just like what happened to Phoenike. Carbajal sits quietly in a meeting while everyone else freaks out. When he finally speaks, he tells them to chill and trust Mahmut Pasha, who's out rallying with the surviving Torkians. At that moment, one guy loses it, pulls out a knife, and points it at Carbajal's throat, apologizing for what he's about to do. Meanwhile, Mahmut and a small group finally link up with about 15,000 surviving soldiers. He thanks the person who saved most of them, and takes a moment to honor Halil Pasha's memory. Once he's collected himself, he orders everyone to get ready to head back to Cielo. Back in Cielo, Kiros rushes to Abariga and Elbark to tell them what just went down with Carbajal. Around the same time, Abiriga and another guy get a signal from Iskender that Mahmut has successfully rallied the survivors. When Kiros shows up, he he spills everything, including the people's plan to hand over Carbajal to the Empire and surrender. That's definitely not good news. As for the Imperial soldiers, they're just hanging out and resting up for their next move against Cielo. Adam and Frenzel chat about how Cielo's supplies are running low. While they're whining, Frenzel hears a loud thudding noise, like an enemy force is charging their camp. He steps outside and sees the Torquian cavalry, led by Mammut, charging straight at them. Hino and Lady Coco spot the incoming army and quickly prepare for a fight. Mammut's cavalry rains arrows down on the Imperial soldiers, then sends Iskender to mess with the Empire's battle bulls. Iskender nails the job, wrecking the Empire's 8-division formation. While the Empire scrambles to fix their formation, Mammut sneaks one of his guys into the Empire's sheep pen. The soldier opens the gates and herds the sheep toward the Torquian army. Once outside, another Torquian shepherd guides the sheep back to Mammut's cavalry. With the sheep secured, Mammut pulls his troops back, leaving the Empire without any food to keep themselves going. During their after-action review, the generals gripe about the blonde commander's oddball tactics to snatch up their food supply. When they ask what the commander looks like, they're told he's a guy with a golden eagle. Meanwhile, Mammut gets a pat on the back from his crew for messing up the Empire's supply chain. That night, two fools rush over to the Haubia gate to hand Pino a surrender letter so they can raise the white flag and hand over Carbajal. Thankfully, Urbach and some random guy handle the clowns before they completely blow it. As for the flag carriers, Abariga and Kiros take them out quietly and keep an eye on the Imperial soldiers. From their spot, they notice the Imperial troops marching off to fight somewhere. They're not about to let the idiots surrender, so they start searching for Carbajal while Mammut focuses on dealing with the Imperial soldiers. Frenzel and Adam chat about Coco's situation, hoping her smarts will finally help the Empire score a win. The next day, a couple of generals talk about how the Torquians have taken shelter in Espada territory to recover. Soon, they figure out just how connected the eastern side of Rumeriana is as supplies keep flowing into Espada to keep the troops alive. One of them asks Coco, the master strategist, how the Torquians are pulling this off. She answers with something Louis told her a while back. Apparently, Louis mentioned a ray of hope he's worried might mess up his plans to take over the Torquian states. Coco clues Pino and the others in, saying Torquier's ray of hope might just be the blonde eagle guy, who also happens to be Halil Pasha's foster son. 4 days later, Mammut sends out messenger pigeons with his final message to Torquia Pashalu. By nightfall, he and his soldiers are crossing grassy plains to reach a basin under the full moon. The moonlight makes the journey kind of magical for Mammut and his crew. 2 days later, Coco figures out where the Torquian army is setting up camp near the Espadon border eats the basin. She updates her army and starts debating the best move. After listening to a bunch of nonsense from clueless folks, Coco finally steps in and tells the general to catch up to the Torquian forces and finish things once and for all. After 2 more days on the move, Mammut and his people finally get to the basin. They can already feel the tension as the Imperial forces show up to face them. Soon, both sides are staring each other down. Once all the Imperial soldiers get off their boats, Mammut signals the 3,000 Espadon troops hiding in the grass to jump up and ambush them. Not long after, reinforcements from Humo, Tauro, and other smaller cities arrive to surround the Imperial army. Coco quickly realizes she made a huge mistake thinking she could trap the Torquian army. In the end, Mammut steps up and takes charge, ready to face the Empire on his own terms. So the Empire's in a real bad spot, and there's not much they can do to save themselves. Their only play in this mess is to fight their way out of Mammut's trap. First up, Mammut tells his archers to get their flaming arrows ready. Once everything's good to go, they let loose and set the rafts on fire, trapping the Imperial soldiers even more. But Pino's not ready to throw in the towel yet. He orders the 7th and 8th divisions to take on the Espadon and Humaean armies, and then has 2 more divisions back them up. After that, he leads the remaining 4 divisions himself to try and wipe out the Torquian army for good. As the Imperial troops move into their new formations, the Espadans, El Toro, and the others charge at the 14 divisions to mess up their plans. The 14th division gets their heavy weapons ready to stall for reinforcements. But then, the El Toro mercenaries throw a big ladder at the soldiers, breaking their formation as they rush toward the cannons. Just when the Imperial troops are about to fire, the twin mayors swoop in and destroy the cannons. With the cannons out of the picture, Mammut can attack the Empire without any worries. The mercenaries signal the other Torquian divisions that they've succeeded, and everyone charges at the Imperial soldiers all at once. Pino and Coco see the Torquians trying to break out of their trap, which they can't let happen. They immediately call for backup. While waiting, the 7th and 8th divisions get tricked by the tiny Espadon soldiers into chasing them, which leads them further away from Pino's main army and straight into Mammut's trap. The Imperial soldiers are so clueless they don't even notice the dry moat the Espadons dug. By the time they start falling in, it's too late. With half their soldiers gone, the Espadons attack the rest in waves. Within minutes, Pino finds out the 7th and 8th divisions are toast. Meanwhile, the mercenaries make sure to burn everything tied to the 13th division. Around then, Mammut spots a way out of the trap and rushes for it. The 11th division tries to leave the trap to back up the fallen divisions, but the mercenaries crush them right away. Now the trap's broken, and the Empire's already lost 3 or 4 divisions. Their reinforcements show up way too late. late. Mammut takes the chance to go after the 7th and 8th divisions to finish them off completely. Coco figures out his plan pretty quickly but realizes both sides are stuck in a deadlock. What she doesn't know is that Mammut's still got some tricks up his sleeve. At the right moment, he sneaks up from behind, leaps into the air, and wrecks one of the divisions. With the 7th and 8th divisions totally wiped out, their commander is left high and dry by his own troops. It doesn't take long for the enemy to find and kill him while he's holding the Imperial flag. Back in the Empire, Louis the Bastard senses something's off and starts worrying about what's going down on the battlefield. Ryus, the loudmouth captain, finally gets how bad things are. He says some dumb stuff before charging at another big-shot Torquian dude. This time, though, Ryus gets taken out by the Torquian soldiers. Meanwhile, Coco and Pino hear that Captain Barnett managed to escape. Coco thinks that's a win, since they need to keep the military engineers safe. She tells Pino to round up what's left of their army and head for Espada, the closest city, to take it while the defenses are weak. If they pull it off, bouncing back will be a breeze. There's some back and forth about the plan, but Coco convinces Pino to move out and march on Espada. Not long after, the 5th Division commander hears about Pino's retreat. To help Pino get away, he puts his division in front of the Torquians to buy time, but Mammut shows up and smashes through the 5th Division like it's no big deal. Meanwhile, Kiros and the others are taking a break to piece together clues about where the director might be hiding. Then they spot Mammut's signal showing he won the battle and give him props for it. After sending the signal, Mammut keeps chasing the enemy while Kiros and his team keep hunting for the director. When Coco and Pino see Torquier's victory signal, they're fuming. While the other commanders complain about how annoying Torquier's tactics are, Coco stays quiet. Pino asks her why, and she admits she messed up. Pino realizes the irony: what he thought would crush Torquier's morale actually fired them up instead. The next morning, the Torquians start raining arrows on the rear divisions of the Imperial Army. The rear commander is laser-focused, but it's too late. When Mammut and his troops come charging out of the fog, it's game over for the commander and his division gets trampled. Pino and what's left of his army keep rushing toward Espada, but they notice a dust cloud closing in fast. Someone points out that Coco's plan is already falling apart, but they stay calm, hoping there aren't any traps ahead. Along the way, a wounded Imperial soldier starts rambling about how the Empire's brutal actions are somehow righteous. The pain's messing with his head, and he slowly dies. His buddy lays him down, but as soon as he does, scavengers hiding in the trees jump out with weapons. Pino tells his men to ignore them and focus on getting to Espada alive. When they finally reach Espada, they throw up ladders to start a siege. Pino sets up soldiers at the back to stop the enemy from taking them down. Then Linz, the leader of the mercenaries hired by Espada, shows up on the city wall and warns Pino not to get too cocky. Before long, Mammut and his army roll up. Mammut offers them a chance to surrender and end the fight. Coco, feeling emotional and desperate, stands on her horse and estimates the Torquians have about 13,000 soldiers. Since they still have 15,000, she thinks they can win if they fight. Pino shuts her down and orders his men to raise their flags so they can take the city and hold off the Torquians. With that, Mammut clenches his fist, ready to finish the final chapter of the Great Rumeriana War. Blanca and Vasco get the scoop on the war from some village lady. When Blanca hears what's going down in Cielo, she rushes to Vasco, all excited, to tell him the war's about to wrap up. Vasco's pretty stoked about the news and wishes the guy ending the war good luck, hoping he makes it out alive to tell the story. Meanwhile, Pino's busy taking over Espada. He sends some of his guys to keep Torquier off his back while he charges into Espada to grab the city. Mammut's just chilling, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the time's right, he goes after the Imperial soldiers blocking his path to Pino. Pino, thinking there's only 1,000 mercenaries guarding Espada, gets his troops all riled up and ready to fight. But just as they're about to make their move, Linz drops a bombshell. Turns out there are actually 10,000 mercenaries protecting the city. She even throws in a comment about their clients being crazy rich before raining down arrows on the Imperial troops. Over in Cielo, Cassandra, Kiros, Abariga, and Urbach are freaking out because they can't find Carbajal. The last place to check is the Tower of Silence, which is a pretty big deal. On the battlefield, the Imperial soldiers are getting wrecked. They've already lost half of their 11th Division, and it's only getting worse. One commander tries to convince Pino to give up so the rest can survive, but another commander knows it's game over. She charges in, gets herself killed, and right after that, the 10th Division's commander steps up to lead his men. He gives this big, emotional speech, but it just sends them straight into Mammut's trap. Mammut doesn't hold back, he takes them out like they're nothing. The crew searching for Carbajal finally makes it to the Tower of Silence. Abiriga realizes they'll have to climb to the top. Nobody complains, though they know they've got to handle things before someone shows up. Urbach gets curious and asks Kiros why Mammut says he hates war but is so good at it. He even points out how Mammut's strategies are next level. Kiros just stays quiet and lets Urbach figure it out on his own. Back on the battlefield, Pino realizes how bad things are falling apart. Coco, meanwhile, comes to terms with being a failure and letting Louis down. She gives Pino props for being the best commander and for going against orders to chase the Empire's dream. Pino knows he's done for, so he charges at Mahmut and dies fighting, like a true warrior. Mahmut then rides toward the last of the Empire's soldiers, takes out Coco, and raises Pino's head on a spike. With that, Mahmut claims victory and waits for the sunrise. When morning comes, he collects the spoils of war and tells one of his fellow pashas to split everything between Lince and the others who fought hard to protect Espada. Lince is a bit shocked to get so much cash and valuables, but she figures it makes sense, since Torquians are solid people who always keep their word. Mahmut finally earns the respect of his whole army. After a grueling war that went on for days, he tells his men to rest up so they can make it back to Cielo in one piece. As the soldiers head off, Mahmut stays behind, still mourning the loss of his foster dad. Meanwhile, some coward who managed to escape the enemy shows up at the camp to tell Frenzel and Adam that Pino is moving toward Espada. While the guy claims Pino is headed there on purpose, Frenzel figures Pino was probably forced to go there. For now, they decide to pull back from the fight and head home to avoid losing more men. Over at the Tower of Silence, the losers holding Carbajal hostage figure out they've been found when the three musketeers start climbing up the tower. To stop them, the losers chuck rocks at them, managing to knock down Quiros and Erbach, but Abiriga keeps going. Quiros starts bad-mouthing Abiriga as the other citizens of the state gather with weapons, looking scared out of their minds. Apparently, the losers and the panicked citizens are worried they've been betrayed by Venedict and Torquier. Quiros tries to hype up Mahmut's success, but the idiots don't buy it. One of them calls out Augusto, the guy who locked up Carbajal, and tells him to come out with the director. Augusto shows up with one of his buddies, holding a long sword to Carbajal's throat. He announces he's gonna kill Carbajal for going against the Empire. One of the older citizens there is cool with it, but then a refugee calls that guy a dirtbag for supporting an illegal execution. A fight breaks out between the Ninan refugee and some of the citizens. Cassandra steps in, warning them to stop fighting each other since they were all refugees once. While Abiriga climbs the wall to rescue Carbajal, Carbajal stalls for time by giving a final speech to the citizens before they execute him. After saying some over-the-top stuff, Carbajal finally apologizes for failing them and making them mad. When he's done, he leaves everything in Cassandra's hands and accepts his fate. Abiriga almost gets to him, but he's too late. The loser slits Carbajal's throat. After the director is killed, there's a moment of silence as Cassandra picks up his head and calls it the will of the people. Back at the camp, Frenzel and Adam argue about retreating. Adam thinks they shouldn't run yet, worried that Cielo might come after them if they find out they're pulling back. Frenzel tells him to chill and focus on the real issue, the 5,000 El Toro soldiers marching their way. Eventually, they start retreating, and Cielo finds out pretty quickly. It hits the idiots that killing their director was pointless. By nightfall, Mahmut and the others reach Cielo and see a funeral being held for Carbajal. Erbach waits for the right moment to start blaming people, but Mahmut surprises him by staying calm and mature about the whole thing. While Augustus and Solomon try to defend themselves, Cassandra shuts them up, telling them to just follow the director's orders from now on. By the end of her little speech, Solomon and Augustus feel like total losers for being so pathetic and useless. Cassandra talks to Mahmut about a few more things before saying her goodbyes. Before heading back to Torquier, Mahmut puts the people of Cielo in charge of the anti-imperial alliance until they're brave enough to lead themselves. After that, Abiriga and Quiros hang out with the El Toro guys to talk about why Venedict is taking so long. During the conversation, Elbark gains even more respect for Mahmut. As for Mahmut, he sticks around to finish attending the director's funeral before heading back to Torquay. After the Cielo War, some folks in the anti-imperial alliance started thinking it'd be a good idea to let Espada take over Cielo. Out of 55 countries, 38 were down with the idea. But then Lucio Doge from Venedict gave this speech that let Torquay Pashalu step in and claim Cielo instead. At the next big meeting, Buyuk Pasha made Mahmut the governor of Cielo and brought in other officials to help him out. Before wrapping up military stuff, Buyuk Pasha also put Mimar Zeki Pasha in charge of rebuilding the city. Mahmut's feeling pretty good about his new gig and is ready to take on the responsibility. Before the meeting ended, Mahmut got a chance to speak. He told everyone that Cielo couldn't keep relying on handouts from other countries now that it's part of Torquay Pashalu. His plan? Rebuild the city of Amalet in Cielo and use the profits to fund the city's future. One of the Pashas asked how he was going to get the land for such a big project. Zeki, the guy in charge of construction, suggested tearing down some poor folks' houses and rebuilding them elsewhere, but Zaganos wasn't cool with that. He wanted to keep the pride of the Cielo people intact by sticking to their original system. He figured that way, if Torquay Pashalu ever became an empire, Cielo could be its first province. That idea caught everyone off guard since no one had thought of it before. Zeki tried to shut Zaganos down with accusations, but Zaganos clapped back, explaining how great empires were built in the past, like the Balt-Rhine Empire and the fallen Phoeniki Empire. He even hinted at Torquay becoming an empire someday. By the end of it, Mahmut gave in and agreed with Zaganos. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Minister Louis was getting grilled by other ministers factors in the empire. They wanted to make peace with Turkey and stop the fighting, but Louis wasn't ready to throw in the towel. He pointed out that their army was still about 8 times stronger than Turkey's, and that they'd gained territory like Skoglio and Campana during the campaign. He didn't get why everyone was so worked up. An old guy suggested they should just make peace and focus on holding on to what they've got. But Louis reminded them about Zaganos Pasha, the guy running the divan, who wouldn't stop until their empire was toast. Elsewhere, Kiros, Abiriga, and Suleiman were talking about what's next for their leader and Zaganos' big plans for the future. As a top-ranking Pasha, people had high expectations for Mahmud, especially the citizens. But honestly, Zaganos' plan wasn't all that bad. They figured this was the perfect moment to make a move. After the meeting, Mahmud and Zaganos catch up like they always do. This time, Zaganos gives Mahmud props for getting revenge for Halil Pasha's death. But Mahmud surprises him by saying that wasn't his goal. Turns out, Mahmud doesn't hate the people of the empire, he just hates war and the jerk who keeps starting wars for selfish reasons. Zaganos, caught off guard for once, still doesn't let Mahmud take the win. Instead, he tells Mahmud he might be wrong but admits he respects his approach. That day, Zaganos realizes he's not like Mahmud and finally accepts it. Mahmud asks if Zaganos still wants to go after the empire, and when Zaganos says yes, Mahmud begs him to stop the war no matter what. But Zaganos knows the fighting won't end unless they stop the Baltrine Empire's violent ways. He wishes Mahmud good luck and encourages him to keep moving forward so he can one day fill Halil Pasha's shoes. Meanwhile, Louis hosts a lunch with Duchess Lele and Glalat. They talk about using his family's resources and taxes from new territories to build social welfare projects to win over the people, all while continuing to expand their control. Lele is impressed by Louis' sneaky plans, but Louis points out a big problem: Zaganos Pasha's determination. Louis knows Zaganos won't stop until he takes the empire down. Lele dismisses Zaganos, but Louis asks if she knows Mahmud Pasha. Glalat brushes him off as insignificant, and Lele agrees. For now, their main concern is Zaganos, the relentless servant. A few days later, the Divan gives Zaganos the green light to invade the empire with 40,000 Turkian troops. As Zaganos heads out, Suleiman, Kiros, and Abariga talk about how this is a once-in-a-lifetime shot to defeat the empire. Mahmud also gets some solid construction plans for Imalet from Ecchi. They shake hands and leave with Zaganos. Mahmud says goodbye to Suleiman and Zaganos before heading to Chielo to oversee the city's rebuilding. Once there, he greets Elbark and meets Cassandra to talk about how things are going. Cassandra thanks him for helping with reconstruction while respecting their pride. To honor Carbajal, Mahmud asks Cassandra if he can name the city Carbajal's Imalet. Cassandra agrees with a smile. Meanwhile, Zeki and the pink-haired Pasha chat about their current project and how it's a great tribute to Halil Pasha. Later that evening, Blanca and Vasco finally meet Mahmud Pasha. Vasco shows Mahmud his new weapon plans to use against the empire. But Mahmud, remembering Halil Pasha, realizes the empire could copy the design and turn it against them. So, he burns the plans, just like Halil Pasha would have done, and tells Vasco he'll understand why when he's older. For now, Mahmud urges him to focus on creating things that save lives. Blanca watches as Vasco, disappointed, gets rejected again. Meanwhile, Frenzel and Adam worry about a possible invasion, fearing Mahmud Pasha might strike again. Louis goes back to planning his next moves to wage war on their neighbors. Zaganos arrives at Hisar and thanks Ibrahim, the Vali of Hisar, for finishing the Sinul cap in just 4 months. With that done, even the empire will have a hard time attacking them. Ibrahim wishes Zaganos luck on his campaign and lets him through the gates. That day, Zaganos begins his mission to conquer the Baltrine Empire. Mahmud reflects on how far he's come, pays his final respects to Halil Pasha, the greatest Pasha of all time, and continues his journey to greatness.